That bike has broken 63 men professionals, veterans men who've been turning wrenches since before you were born. What makes you think a girl who can barely keep her daddy's shop from going under is going to do what none of them could? Marcus Walker's voice cut through the garage like a blade, and 70 pairs of eyes locked onto Emily Carter all at once. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She set her father's old toolbox down on the concrete floor, the metal latches clicking loud in the dead silence, and she said the words that would change everything. Because every one of them came in here trying to fix it. I came in here to listen to it. If you've never heard a room full of Hell's Angels go completely silent, you don't know what silence really feels like. Subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story has traveled. The town of Red Valley, Arizona didn't have much to brag about. It sat in the middle of the Sonoran Desert like something the map forgot: a gas station, a diner, a dollar store, and about 4,000 people who mostly kept their heads down and their opinions to themselves. The kind of place where everybody knew everybody else's business, but nobody ever said it out loud. Where the summer heat came down so hard, it warped the asphalt on the main road, and the winters were cold enough to crack your lips in your sleep. But Red Valley had one thing nobody could take away from it, and that was the legend of the cursed bike. Ask anyone in town and they'd tell you the story the same way, with the same lowered voice and the same slow shake of the head, like they were talking about something that belonged more to ghost stories than to mechanical history. 12 years ago, a custom motorcycle had gone quiet inside the garage of the local Hells Angels chapter, and it had never made a sound since. Not a real sound anyway. 63 mechanics had walked through those clubhouse doors across those 12 years. Some of them locally, some driven in from Tucson, 2 flown out from as far as Chicago, and every single one of them had met the same wall. The engine would turn over, it would breathe. It would growl low and deep for exactly 11 seconds, like a sleeping animal waking up, and then it would die. Clean and sudden and final, like something inside the machine had made a decision and refused to be talked out of it. People started calling it cursed after the 3rd mechanic quit and said he'd never touch it again. After the 7th, they started leaving it alone altogether. After the 15th, even the jokes stopped. Somewhere around mechanic number 30, the story stopped being funny and started being something else, something that sat in the back of the town's collective mind like an unanswered question nobody was brave enough to ask out loud anymore. The Hells Angels chapter in Red Valley was led by a man named Marcus Walker. He was 51 years old, built like a side-by-side refrigerator, with forearms that looked like they'd been carved from old wood, and a voice that could silence a bar fight from across the room. He'd patched in at 22 and hadn't looked back since spending nearly 3 decades building the chapter, from a loose collection of hard-drinking road warriors into something more structured, more deliberate, and more feared. He wasn't a cruel man, but he wasn't a soft one either, and everyone in Red Valley understood the difference between those two things very clearly. Marcus had kept the motorcycle locked behind a heavy door in the back of the clubhouse garage for the last 12 years. Not because he thought it would ever run, but because some things deserve to be kept even when they're broken, because some things carry weight that goes beyond whether they work or not. The oldest member of the chapter was a man named Victor Lawson. He was 64 years old, gray-bearded, sun-weathered, and quiet in the particular way that some men become quiet when they've been carrying something heavy for a long time and learn to stop expecting anyone else to help them with it. Victor had been with the chapter for 38 years. He knew where every body was buried metaphorically, and some people in town suspected otherwise. He sat at the far end of the table at every meeting and said very little, but when he did speak, everyone listened. Victor Lawson hated that motorcycle. He never said it in those exact words. He didn't need to. You could see it in the way his jaw tightened whenever someone brought it up, in the way his eyes went somewhere else entirely when a new mechanic came through to try his luck with it. Every time another man walked away from that bike, shaking his head, something flashed through Victor's expression that wasn't satisfaction exactly, but wasn't grief either. It was something older and harder than either one of those things. It was the look of a man watching justice play out exactly the way he'd always believed it should. Nobody in the chapter knew why Victor felt that way. The older members had theories the way people always develop theories around things they don't fully understand. But nobody asked Victor directly because you didn't ask Victor Lawson direct questions about things he hadn't chosen to talk about. That was just how it was. And then Emily Carter came to town. She hadn't grown up in Red Valley exactly, but she'd grown up close enough 30 miles north in a wide spot in the road called Cutter's Bend, where her father had run a small engine repair shop out of a converted barn for most of Emily's childhood. Daniel Carter had been the kind of mechanic other mechanics drove 40 minutes to watch work. He had a quality that most technical people try to develop and never quite get a natural instinct for the language of machines. He didn't just diagnose problems, he understood them. He'd put his ear close to an idling engine, the way a doctor puts a stethoscope to a chest, and come away knowing things that took other people hours of diagnostic testing to figure out. Emily had grown up at his elbow. She'd handed him tools before she could read the names on them, learning by feel and proximity what most people have to study in classrooms. By the time she was 10 years old, she could change a timing belt clean. By 15, she was doing valve adjustments on her own. By 18, she had the kind of mechanical intuition that most experienced shop owners never develop at all, the kind that lives in the hands and the ears rather than in the textbooks. Daniel Carter died 8 months before the events of this story. Pancreatic cancer, which came fast the way it always does, giving him just enough time to put his affairs in what he believed was order before it took him. What it didn't give him time to do was explain everything. He left Emily the shop and the building that housed it, which should have been enough, except that Emily soon discovered the building had been mortgaged twice, and the second mortgage had been quietly sliding toward default for 2 years, while Daniel was too proud and too sick to ask for help. She had tried to keep it alive. She'd taken every job that came through the door, worked every hour she could manage, called in every favor she had with every supplier she knew. She was good at the work, genuinely, technically excellent, in a way that should have been enough to carry the business. But being good at fixing things and being good at running a business are two completely different skill sets. And Emily was still learning the second one while trying to save what was left of the first. The bank had given her 60 days. Those 60 days were nearly up. She was sitting at her father's workbench at 2:30 in the morning, 3 days before the notice period ended, sorting through the last of his paperwork. Not because she expected to find anything she hadn't already found, but because she couldn't sleep and she needed something to do with her hands when she found the advertisement. It was folded inside an old technical manual, tucked between 2 pages with the careful, deliberate placement of something hidden rather than forgotten. A single sheet of paper hand-typed with a phone number at the bottom. The language was plain and the offer was clear: $20,000 reward to any qualified mechanic capable of repairing the custom motorcycle held at the Red Valley Hells Angels chapter. Inquiries in person only, no phone calls. Emily read it twice. Then she turned it over, looking for something she might have missed. A date, a signature, additional terms. There was nothing else. Just the offer, the number, and the address, $20,000, the exact amount she needed to cover the arrears on the second mortgage and buy herself another 6 months to figure out what came next. She sat with it for a long time in the quiet of the shop that had been her father's whole adult life, listening to the desert wind move against the corrugated metal walls. The sensible thing, the thing any rational person would tell her to do, was to go to bed and deal with this in the daylight when she could think clearly. Call the number in the morning. Ask some questions. Find out what she was walking into before she walked into it. Emily Carter was her father's daughter, and her father had never been particularly sensible about things that mattered to him. She drove to Red Valley the next morning. She arrived at the clubhouse at 8:15 before the desert heat had fully committed to its daily intentions, with her father's toolbox in the passenger seat of her truck and the advertisement on the dashboard where she could see it. The clubhouse was a low, flat building at the edge of town, surrounded by a chain-link fence that had seen better decades, with a hand-painted sign above the entrance that said private and meant it. A dozen motorcycles were already parked out front, the kind of machines that looked like they'd earned every scratch and dent they carried. She sat in her truck for exactly 4 minutes. She counted them without intending to, watching the entrance and understanding with complete clarity what she was about to do. She was a 25-year-old woman with no reputation in this world, no connections in this world, and a toolbox that had belonged to her dead father. She was about to walk through a door that had stopped 63 experienced, connected, professionally credentialed men cold. She picked up her toolbox and got out of the truck. The guard at the entrance was a thick-necked man in his mid-40s named Boone, who looked at her the way you look at something you're not sure is real. He had a thick black beard shot through with gray and a set of eyes that had spent a long time reading people for signs of trouble. He looked at Emily for a moment, processing the information in front of him, and then he said flatly, "You lost." "No," Emily said. She handed him the advertisement. "I'm here about the bike." Boone looked at the paper. He looked at her. He looked at the paper again. "You're a mechanic," he said, and his voice made it clear that what he actually meant was something more like, "You cannot possibly be a mechanic." "Yes," Emily said. "You work on bikes." "I work on engines," Emily said. "Engines are engines." That landed somewhere in Boone's expression. Not agreement, not disagreement, but something that had the shape of a man recalibrating his assumptions slightly and not being happy about it. He told her to wait and disappeared inside. Emily stood in the desert morning with her toolbox and watched a hawk drift in slow circles over the scrub land to the east. And she thought about her father. And she thought about the $60,000 in mortgage debt that stood between her and the loss of everything he'd built. And she thought about the fact that she had driven 30 miles on 4 hours of sleep because of a folded piece of paper she'd found inside a technical manual at 2:30 in the morning. She decided that either this was going to work or it wasn't, and that standing outside worrying about it wasn't going to change which one it turned out to be. Boone came back 6 minutes later and told her Marcus Walker would see her. The inside of the clubhouse was exactly what she expected, and nothing like it simultaneously. She'd expected to smell motor oil and leather and the particular kind of cigarette smoke that gets so deep into a building's bones that no amount of cleaning ever gets it all the way out. What she hadn't expected was how much machinery there was everywhere, not just in the designated garage area, but throughout the whole space. Engines on work tables, parts in careful organized rows, tools hung with a precision that suggested genuine care. This wasn't a place that treated mechanical things carelessly. Whatever else you might say about the Red Valley chapter, they took their machines seriously. The men took her in as she walked through. There was no subtle about it. They watched her openly the way people watch something unexpected with the full weight of their attention and not 1 ounce of apology for it. She kept her eyes forward and her grip steady on her father's toolbox, and she walked toward the man who was clearly Marcus Walker, the way you walk towards something you've decided to walk toward. Marcus Walker was standing at the far end of the main room with his arms crossed and an expression on his face that sat somewhere between mild curiosity and deep skepticism. He was larger in person than she'd imagined, with the kind of physical presence that comes not just from size, but from the certainty that tends to develop in people who have been the authority in every room they have occupied for a very long time. He looked at Emily the way you look at something genuinely puzzling. "Emily Carter," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. "You're here about the motorcycle." "I saw the advertisement." "Uh-huh." Marcus unfolded his arms and hooked his thumbs in his belt loops, which somehow made him look even more solidly immovable. "You have credentials, shop certifications, anything like that?" "I have experience," Emily said. "My father ran Carter engine repair up in Cutter's Bend for 31 years. I've been working alongside him since I was old enough to hold a socket wrench." "Carter engine repair," Marcus said slowly, like he was turning the name over in his mouth. "Daniel Carter," Emily said. "That was my father." Something shifted in Marcus Walker's face. It was quick, a flash of something she couldn't quite read before it disappeared back behind the calm, evaluating expression he'd been wearing before. But it was there. She filed it away without commenting on it. "Your father is Daniel Carter," Marcus said. Emily said. "He passed 8 months ago." "I'm sorry to hear that," Marcus said, and his voice carried something that sounded to Emily like it meant more than standard politeness, though she couldn't say why. "That doesn't change the facts of what you're asking to take on, though. That bike has broken 63 men professionals, veterans men who have been turning wrenches since before you were born. What makes you think a girl who can barely keep her daddy's shop from going under is going to do what none of them could?" The room had gone quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when people are watching something play out and don't want to make any noise that might interfere with it. Emily was aware of every set of eyes in the building. She was aware of Marcus Walker's size and certainty, and the weight of 6 decades of organizational authority behind his words. She was aware of the toolbox in her hand and the advertisement in her pocket and the $60,000 of debt that was going to eat the last thing her father had left her. She set the toolbox down on the concrete floor. The metal latches clicked loud in the silence. "Because every one of them came in here trying to fix it," she said. "I came in here to listen to it." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one before it. The kind that has weight to it. The kind that means something was just said that people need a moment to process, and then from the far corner of the room a voice said, "Let her leave." Victor Lawson was sitting in a wooden chair against the back wall, which Emily hadn't noticed before because Victor Lawson was very good at not being noticed until he chose to be. He was older than everyone else in the room, gray-bearded and still with eyes that had been watching Emily since the moment she walked in. He was wearing a weathered leather vest with the chapters patch, and the patches on that vest told stories in the shorthand language of people who understood what they meant. He looked at Emily the way you look at something you've already made up your mind about. "She's wasting our time," Victor said. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. "Send her back to her daddy's broken-down shop." "Her daddy's gone, Victor," Marcus said quietly. "Then she's got nothing to prove and nobody to prove it to," Victor said. "This isn't a place for people playing at something they don't understand." Emily looked at Victor Lawson directly. "I'm not playing at anything," she said. "I'm here because I believe I can repair that motorcycle, and I believe that because my father taught me to trust what I understand about engines. And what I understand is that a machine that behaves that consistently dying at exactly the same point every single time without variance for 12 years isn't broken. It's doing something intentional, and I'd like the chance to find out what." The quality of quiet that landed after that was sharper than any of the previous silences. Because Emily had just said something that none of the 63 mechanics before her had said. She hadn't claimed superior skill or superior tools or superior knowledge. She'd said something about the motorcycle itself, a statement about its behavior that cut against the prevailing 12-year understanding of the problem in a way that several people in the room found themselves involuntarily considering. Victor Lawson's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened just slightly and Emily saw it. "Marcus," Victor said. "I heard her," Marcus said. He was looking at Emily with an expression that had moved past skepticism into something more complicated. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You get 12 hours. You can look at it. You can try to start it. You can do whatever you think needs doing. If you can get it running and keep it running past 11 seconds, the 20,000 is yours. If you can't, you walk out the same way you walked in and we don't hear from you again." "That's fair," Emily said. "And you work in the garage with the door open," Marcus added. "Boone keeps eyes on you, not because we think you are going to steal anything, but because those are the rules and everyone follows them." "I understand," Emily said. Victor Lawson stood up from his chair. He was taller than she'd expected, and the way he carried himself was the way people carry themselves when they've spent a lifetime not backing down from things. He looked at Marcus, not at Emily, and said, "This is a mistake." Then he walked toward the back of the building and didn't look back. The room exhaled. Marcus Walker looked at Emily for one more long moment, and then he nodded toward the hallway that led to the garage. "Boone," he said, "show her where it is." The garage smelled like oil and time. It was a serious working space, lifts, compressors, organized toolboxes, the accumulated infrastructure of decades of people who took mechanical work seriously. Boone led her past all of it to a heavy door at the back with a padlock that he opened with a key from his ring. The room behind the door was smaller than she expected. Just large enough for the motorcycle and enough space to walk around it. No other equipment, no other storage. Just the bike on its kickstand in the center of the room with a single work light above it. Emily stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long time without moving. It was extraordinary. That was the first and most immediate impression that whatever else this machine was, whoever had made it with an intention that went far beyond function. The frame was custom, not a production configuration she recognized, but a hand-built architecture with proportions that were both exactly right and unlike anything standardized. The metalwork had an organic quality to it, curves and joints that seemed to have grown into their shapes rather than been forced into them. There were elements of personalization throughout small design decisions made at the level of detail where most builders stop carrying the level siren, where only the people who care most deeply about a thing keep working. Boone leaned against the door frame with his arms crossed. 63 men, he said. It wasn't aggressive, it was almost something like a warning offered in good faith. Some of them were serious people. "I know," Emily said. "It's going to do what it always does," Boone said. "Run for 11 seconds and die. Then you're going to want to know if you can try again, and the answer is yes, you can try as many times as you want in your 12 hours. And then you're going to walk out of here the same way everyone else walked out. Maybe, Emily said. She set her father's toolbox down outside the door because she wasn't going to touch anything yet. She walked into the room and she stood next to the motorcycle and she just looked at it. She put her hands on her knees and bent close to the frame, and she looked at the welds and the joints and the way the metal moved through space and the decisions someone had made about how to build it. She was quiet for a long time. From the main room, voices carried through the hallway. She could hear men talking about her, not cruelly, just with the blunt honesty of people who didn't think she could hear them or didn't particularly care if she could. How long is she going to stand there staring at it? Give her 20 minutes. She'll want to start it, and then she'll be done. Marcus is losing his mind letting a kid in here. 63 men couldn't fix it. What's number 64 going to do different? Emily heard all of it, Don. She didn't react to any of it. She was looking at the motorcycle, and the more she looked, the more certain she became that something was wrong with the prevailing theory about what was wrong with it. A machine that died at exactly 11 seconds every time without variance for 12 years, that wasn't a malfunction. Malfunctions had variance. Malfunctions degraded over time or improved or changed their character as components wore or settled. Malfunctions didn't hold the same behavior with perfect consistency across 12 years in 63 different mechanics applying 63 different diagnoses and adjustments. That was deliberate behavior. Whatever was happening at 11 seconds was happening on purpose. She spent the first 2 hours just looking. She walked around the bike slowly. She looked at the frame from every angle. She examined the fuel system, the electrical runs, the custom modifications to the intake. She followed the lines of the bike's design the way you follow the argument of a story, looking for where it led, looking for what it was building toward. It was during this methodical survey that she found the first anomaly. It was on the underside of the frame, near the junction of the main tube, and the lower bracket, a weld that didn't match the surrounding work. Not inferior work as Keeley, but different work. The surrounding welds had a character that spoke of a single hand working in a consistent style with complete mastery. This weld in this one spot had been done in a way that it suggested it had been added after the original construction, not by a different skill level, by a different intention. She straightened up and stood thinking. Then she got down on her hands and knees and looked at the fuel system from below, at the angle you'd only ever have if you were looking for something specific. And she found the second anomaly, a small fitting that appeared to be part of the fuel line, but whose position made no functional sense for the flow of the system. It wasn't blocking anything, it wasn't causing anything, it was just there. She sat up and looked at the ceiling of the small room for a moment. Then she got up and went to the doorway and said to Boone, "Is there any original documentation on this bike? Build notes, schematics, anything like that?" Boone looked at her the way you look at someone asking for something you weren't expecting to be asked for. "Documentation," he said. "Build records," Emily said. "Notes, anything the original builder might have left, even something handwritten." "I don't know about anything like that," Boone said. "You'd have to ask Marcus." "Can I?" Boone looked at her for a moment, then pushed himself off the doorframe and disappeared down the hall. Emily went back to the motorcycle. Marcus came to the garage door 5 minutes later. He stood there looking at Emily, who was crouched beside the fuel system again, and he said, "Boone says you want build documentation." "If any exists," Emily said without looking up. "Most from whoever built it. Anything written down about the original construction?" Silence. Emily looked up. Marcus Walker was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him yet. Something complicated, something that sat at the intersection of several different emotions and didn't fully resolve into any one of them. He was quiet for long enough that it ceased to feel like a pause and started to feel like a decision being made. "Why do you want them?" he said finally. "Because the welds don't match," Emily said. "There's a modification to this frame that came after original construction, and there's a component in the fuel line that has no functional purpose I can identify. Whoever built this machine was communicating something, and I want to know what they were saying before I start turning things." The corridor of silence that followed her words was somehow different from all the previous silences. It had a different texture to it. Marcus Walker looked at Emily Carter for a long, still moment, and whatever was happening behind his eyes, he kept it private. "I don't have build notes," he said at last, "but I'll tell you what I can." He came into the small room and stood beside her, and he told her what he knew about the motorcycle's origin, that it had arrived at the chapter 12 years ago, brought by a man who had worked alongside the chapter for several years before that. A craftsman, someone with an extraordinary gift. The details he offered were careful and chosen. Emily sensed which was interesting in itself. He was telling her enough to be useful, not necessarily everything he knew. This person who built it, Emily said, what happened to them? Marcus looked at the motorcycle. They moved on, he said. It was not the most convincing sentence Emily had ever heard a person say. She let it go for now. She had work to do. She spent the next hour tracing every run of the electrical system, following each wire from source to termination, mapping the circuit architecture in her head with the kind of patience her father had taught her, never assuming, always following, always letting the machine show you where it went, rather than deciding beforehand where you thought it should. The electrical system was as custom as everything else, which meant there was no standard diagram she could reference, no production schematic that would tell her what was normal and what wasn't, which meant every decision was going to require her to understand this machine's individual logic. At the end of that hour, she had a theory. It was incomplete and it might be wrong, but it was a theory, and it gave her something to test. She went to her toolbox and came back with exactly 3 tools. Just 3. Boone watched her from the doorway, and she could feel his attention sharpen slightly, not because the tools themselves were unusual, but because the selection of only 3 made with evident deliberateness was different from what he'd seen the others do. You're not going to use more than that, he said. Not yet, Emily said. She made 2 small adjustments to the fuel system, neither of them removing or replacing anything, just repositioning the anomalous fitting to see what happened to the circuit it seemed to be part of. Then she made 1 adjustment to a connection in the electrical system that she'd flagged during her survey. Then she stood up and looked at the motorcycle. Okay, she said quietly to the motorcycle in the tone of voice her father used to use when he was ready to find out if he'd been right about something. Let's hear what you have to say. She started the engine. The sound of it was remarkable. Even before the problem, even knowing what was about to happen, the quality of the engine's voice in those first seconds was something that moved through the room with a kind of authority that made you understand immediately why someone had spent real care building it. It was a deep, composed, purposeful sound. Not loud for its own sake, just real in a way that made you aware of how many machines weren't. 6 seconds. 7, 8. She counted them. Watching the gauges, watching the fuel system, watching the electrical connections she'd adjusted, watching everything at once with the particular multi-attentional quality that her father had told her took years to develop, and that she'd apparently developed faster than he expected. 9, 10, 11. The engine died. Same as always. Clean, sudden, final. Emily stood in the sudden quiet and she was smiling. Boone stared at her. You're smiling, he said. I know what's happening, Emily said. It died, Boone said. I know, Emily said, but I know why now, and it's not what anyone thought. She left the garage and walked through the hallway into the main room, and the 20-odd men who were in there at that moment all looked up at once because the word had traveled fast that the engine had run. That sound had reached them through the walls, and now the woman who had listened to it instead of fighting it was walking toward Marcus Walker with an expression on her face that none of them had seen on anyone who'd come out of that back room before. Not defeat, certainty. I can fix it, she said. But first I need to tell you something about why it's not fixed yet, and some of what I'm going to say is going to be difficult to hear. Marcus Walker looked at her for a long time. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down, and he said, I'm listening. Victor Lawson appeared in the doorway at the back of the room. He was looking at Emily Carter with an expression that, for the first time since she'd arrived, was not quite as certain as it had been before. And for the very first time in 12 years, the question that lived inside the Red Valley Hells Angels chapter, the question that everyone had stopped asking because it seemed like it would never have an answer, began to feel like it might be moving toward one. Marcus Walker was not a man who sat down often. The fact that he had pulled out a chair and placed himself in it in front of this 25-year-old woman who had just walked out of that back room smiling after the engine died, said something that the men watching from around the room understood without needing it explained to them. Marcus sitting down meant Marcus was taking something seriously, and Marcus taking something seriously meant everyone else should too. I'm listening, he said again because Emily hadn't spoken yet. She was standing in the middle of the room and she wasn't fidgeting, wasn't nervous, wasn't performing anything. She was just gathering what she wanted to say the way a person gathers something that matters. The engine isn't broken, Emily said. The room made a sound, not a word, not a sentence, just a collective involuntary noise that meant that is not what we expected you to say. 63 mechanics looked at that bike, said a heavy-set man named Cutter from near the far wall. He had red-brown hair shot through with gray and a voice like gravel being poured into a metal drum. All of them said the same thing, something's wrong with it. All of them were wrong, Emily said, not unkindly, just as a fact. A malfunction doesn't behave the way that engine behaves. A malfunction has variance. It gets worse or it gets better or it changes based on temperature or humidity or how long it's been since the last start. That engine has done exactly the same thing for 12 years, regardless of what anyone adjusted, regardless of what parts were replaced, regardless of season or conditions. 11 seconds, every time, on the dot. Which means what? Exactly what Marcus asked. Which means 11 seconds is not a failure point, Emily said. It's a design specification. Someone built that engine to run for 11 seconds and stop. It's not fighting to stay alive and losing, it's following instructions. The silence this time was different from all the previous silences. It was the silence of people turning an idea over and finding it more solid than they'd expected. That's not possible, said another man, younger, early 30s, with sharp eyes and the kind of focused expression that is suggested he thought carefully before speaking. His name was Reno, and he was the chapter's primary mechanic, had been for 7 years. If anyone in the room had standing to push back on a mechanical argument, it was him. An engine doesn't have instructions like that built into it. You'd need a cutoff mechanism, something in the electrical system, something automated. Yes, Emily said. You would. Reno stared at her. I found it, Emily said. It's in the electrical system. Custom built, which is why nobody identified it. It doesn't look like any standard cutoff configuration because it wasn't made from standard components. It was hand-built into the system from the start. Whoever built this motorcycle wired in a timer that kills the engine at exactly 11 seconds every time the ignition fires. The room held its breath. Why, DeMarcus Walker said. It came out flat and heavy, not a question with a question mark, but a word with weight, the kind of why that means this is the thing that matters. I don't know yet, Emily said, but I think it's a lock. I think the engine stops at 11 seconds because it's waiting for something. A key, a code, some kind of second input that would tell the system it's safe to keep running. Without that input, the cutoff fires at 11 seconds every time. A lock, Marcus said slowly. Like a combination, Emily said. The engine isn't broken, it's protecting something, and it will keep protecting it until whoever built in that protection either provides the combination themselves or leaves it somewhere it can be found. Victor Lawson had been standing in the back doorway the whole time. He hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. But Emily was aware of him the way you're aware of a cold draft in a warm room, not looking at it directly, but feeling it on your skin. She glanced at him now. His face was stone, but his hands, she noticed, were not quite still. I want to keep looking, Emily said, bringing her eyes back to Marcus. I want to trace the lock mechanism further and see if I can find what it's keyed to. But I need to know something first, and I need an honest answer. Ask, Marcus said. The person who built that motorcycle, Emily said. What was their name? Marcus Walker looked at her for a long time. The kind of long time that means someone is making a decision about how much to tell and why. Why does that matter, he said. Because the lock is personal, Emily said. It's not a standard code. It's not a number or a switch. Whatever that engine is waiting for, it's something specific to whoever built it. And if I'm going to find it, I need to understand who that person was and how they thought. Another silence. Marcus glanced toward the back doorway where Victor stood, and something passed between them. The kind of look that carries a full conversation in 2 seconds, and then Marcus looked back at Emily. His name was Daniel, Marcus said. Emily Carter felt the floor shift under her feet. Not literally, but the way the word landed in her chest made something internal move, a seismic thing, small but deep, and she had to work to keep her face where it was, to keep the professional composure she'd been maintaining since she walked in, because the name Marcus had just said was her father's name, and she needed one more piece of information before she let herself understand what that meant. Daniel what? She said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Marcus held her gaze. Carter, Big Carter, he said. The room didn't know what just happened. Most of the men in it had no context for why the name should mean anything to the woman standing in front of them. They heard it and moved on, waiting for whatever came next. Emily Carter did not move. She stood in the middle of that room with her father's name reverberating through her like a struck bell. And she understood, not completely, not yet, but in the way you understand the shape of something before you can see all of it, that she had not found this advertisement by accident. That the folded piece of paper tucked between the pages of a technical manual at 2:30 in the morning had not been waiting there randomly for some wandering mechanic to find. It had been waiting for her. "Excuse me," she said, and her voice was still steady, which she thought was remarkable under the circumstances. "I need to go back to the bike." Marcus let her go. She walked back through the hallway and into the small room, and she stood next to the motorcycle that her father had built, and for the first time since she'd arrived, her hands were shaking slightly. Not much, just enough to notice. She pressed her palms flat against the tank of the motorcycle the way her father used to press his hands against an engine when he was trying to feel something through the metal, rather than see it with his eyes, and she breathed. In through the nose, slow the way he'd taught her when she was 9 years old, and had stripped her first bolt and wanted to cry about it. "You breathe," he'd told her. "You collect yourself. Then you figure out what comes next." She collected herself. Then she started looking again. She spent 40 minutes on the electrical system, tracing the cutoff mechanism forward and backward, from every junction point, mapping it with her mind, the way a cartographer maps unfamiliar territory carefully, without assumptions, following what was actually there instead of what she expected to find. The mechanism was elegant. That was the word that kept arriving in her mind as she worked. It was elegant in the way that some things are elegant, not showing off, not decorative, but structured with an economy of means that spoke of someone who understood deeply what they were doing and cared about doing it cleanly. Her father had been like that. She found the second component at the 50-minute mark. And when she found it, she sat back on her heels and put a hand over her mouth and stayed that way for a moment. It was small. A secondary circuit embedded within the cutoff mechanism, buried in a configuration that you would only notice if you were already looking at the mechanism closely and if you understood what you were seeing when you found it. It wasn't just a cutoff, it was a receiver. The cutoff mechanism was designed to receive an input signal, something transmitted, something broadcast, and that signal, when received, would bypass the 11-second kill and allow the engine to run continuously. Whoever had built this hadn't just locked the engine, they'd built a key into it. A wireless key, something that would need to be in proximity to the bike when it started something broadcasting the right signal on the right frequency, and the engine would recognize it and run. She was on her feet before she fully decided to stand up. She walked to the doorway and said, "Boone?" Boone appeared from around the corner. "Yeah." "The person who built this bike," Emily said. No. "Daniel Carter, did he leave anything here? Any belongings, any equipment, anything at all that stayed behind when he left?" Boone's expression shifted. He was quiet for a moment. "That's a question for Marcus," he said. "Can you get him?" Marcus came to the garage 4 minutes later. He stood in the doorway of the small room and looked at Emily, who was standing next to the motorcycle, with a look on her face he hadn't seen on anyone who'd been in that room before. "He built a receiver into the cutoff," Emily said without preamble. "The engine isn't just set to stop. It's set to respond to a signal. Something he made, something he kept. When that signal is in range, the engine recognizes it and runs. Without it, the cutoff fires every time. I need to know if he left anything behind here that could be transmitting that signal." Marcus Walker was quiet for a very long time. "Come with me," he said. He led her to a different part of the building she hadn't been in before, a back room that served as a combination office and storage space with filing cabinets against one wall and a heavy wooden table in the center. He went to a cabinet in the corner, opened it, reached to the back of the top shelf, and brought out a small metal box. The kind of box that looked handmade, not a store-bought container, but something fabricated, a simple rectangular enclosure of welded steel with a hinged lid, smaller than a shoebox. He set it on the table. "He left this when he left," Marcus said. "Said to keep it near the bike. We never knew why. Nobody ever opened it." Emily looked at the box. "Why not?" she said. "Because he asked us not to," Marcus said simply. "He said it wasn't ours to open. He said someone would come for it eventually." Emily put her hands on the box. The metal was cool under her fingers. She could feel her heartbeat in her palms. She opened it. Inside was a small electronic device, hand-built the same careful fabrication as the mechanism she'd found in the electrical system, clearly made by the same hands. A small battery-powered transmitter, the kind of thing that would broadcast a short-range signal continuously as long as the battery had charge. She recognized it immediately for what it was because she'd just spent an hour studying the receiver it was designed to talk to. And underneath the transmitter, folded in thirds, was a piece of paper. Emily picked it up, unfolded it. Her father's handwriting, she would have known it in a hurricane, would have known it carved in stone in the dark, because she had grown up watching those particular letters form on paper for 25 years, covered the page in his measured, deliberate way. He never wasted words when he wrote. He said what he meant and stopped. She read it twice before she was able to look up. Marcus Walker was watching her face. "He was your father," Marcus said. It wasn't a question anymore. "Yes," Emily said. "He told us someone would come," Marcus said quietly. "He never said who, he never said when." He said, and here Marcus paused and his voice shifted in the way voices shift when a person is repeating something they've been holding for a long time. He said the right person would know what to look for because he'd taught them how to look. That was all he said. Emily's hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped sometime in the last few minutes without her noticing. She looked at her father's letter in her hands, and she thought about a man she had known her whole life as a small-town engine mechanic who smelled like motor oil and made bad coffee and called her Bug from the time she was 3 years old, and she thought about how much of a person can be invisible to the people who love them most. "I need to test the transmitter," she said. "The battery," Marcus said. "Bohem." "I know," Emily said. 12 years is a long time, but let's find out." She brought the transmitter back to the small room where the motorcycle waited, and she stood beside it and she pressed the activation button on the transmitter, and she held it at the range the circuitry suggested was its optimal broadcast distance, and then she reached over with her other hand and she started the engine. It fired, it breathed, it ran. 6 seconds, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 now. She kept counting. 12, 13, the engine did not die. It ran on into the silence of the small room, running the way things run when they've been held back for a long time and are finally allowed to do what they were built to do with a fullness, a completion that made the previous 11 seconds feel like a held breath finally released. Boone made a sound in the doorway, a sharp, involuntary sound, something between a word and pure surprise, and then he turned and walked fast down the hallway, and Emily could hear his voice carrying back to the main room, even before she could make out the words, and what she could make out was enough. "It's running. She got it running. Marcus, Marcus, it's running, and it's not stopping." The sound that came from the main room was not a cheer. It was bigger and stranger than a cheer. The collective reaction of 20 people hearing something they had believed for 12 years was impossible. Happening in the next room, a sound that had disbelief and relief and something she couldn't name mixed together into a noise that vibrated in the walls. Emily stood beside the motorcycle and let it run. She counted 60 seconds. She counted 90. 2 minutes. Then she shut it off cleanly, properly, the way you shut down an engine that's been through something. She stood in the quiet and she looked at the bike her father had built, and she felt something move through her that she didn't have a word for exactly. Not grief, not happiness, not pride, not loss, but something that was made of all of those things in a proportion that didn't exist in any standard emotional vocabulary. When she came back out to the main room, every man in the building was there. They had gathered without being gathered, pulled in by the sound and by Boone's report, and they were standing in an arrangement that was different from before, less structured, less territorial, the particular formation of people who've just had their certainties shifted and haven't quite reorganized themselves around the new information yet. Marcus Walker was standing at the center of it. He looked at Emily when she came in, and his expression was something she hadn't seen on him before. Not surprise exactly, because Emily thought Marcus Walker didn't surprise easily, but a kind of reckoning. The look of someone encountering a thing they'd wondered about for a long time, and finding out the answer was larger than the question. "It ran," he said. "It ran," Emily confirmed. "How long?" 2 minutes and 14 seconds, Emily said. "I shut it down voluntarily. The transmitter battery is low. I don't know how much longer it would have held the signal, but the mechanism works. Once we get the transmitter to a charged state, the bike will run as long as it has fuel." The room took that in. And then Reno, the chapter's mechanic, said something that cut through everything else with the directness of someone who'd been processing all of this carefully and had arrived at the question nobody else had gotten to yet. If Daniel Carter built that lock into the bike, Reno said, and if he knew his daughter would eventually come find it, why didn't he just fix it himself? Why leave it this way for 12 years? The room went quiet in a pointed way, because it was a very good question. Emily had been thinking about it since she read the letter. She was still thinking about it. He couldn't come back, she said. The letter doesn't explain all of it. There are things he doesn't say, things he expects me to figure out on my own, which is... She stopped for a moment and smiled briefly at nothing in particular, very much how he communicated about everything. But he says he couldn't come back. He says the motorcycle was the only way he could leave something for me to find, because it was the only thing he trusted would still be here. Why couldn't he come back? Marcus asked. His voice was careful. He doesn't say, Emily said. And she looked at Marcus when she said it with a steadiness that meant, I noticed you being careful, and I'm being careful too, and we both know there's more to this than what's on the surface. Victor Lawson had come into the room at some point while Emily was speaking. He was standing at the edge of the group, and his expression had undergone a change that was subtle but real. The stone quality was still there, but something beneath it had shifted. Something was moving in his eyes that wasn't moving before. She couldn't tell yet whether it was grief or anger or something else. She filed it away. I need to go back in, Emily said. The transmitter needs a power source, and I want to trace a few more things in the system before I'm confident everything is in the condition it should be. But the short version is, the motorcycle is not cursed. It's not broken. It is an extraordinarily well-built machine that has been waiting for someone to understand it. Waiting 12 years, said a man named Truck, who was built approximately the way his name suggested, and had been standing near the coffee maker looking like he was trying to decide how he felt about all of this. That's a hell of a long wait. Some things are worth waiting for, Emily said. She went back to the motorcycle. She spent another 3 hours in that small room, and in those 3 hours she went over every system of the bike with the thoroughness her father had taught her, not rushing now that the central mystery was solved, because solving the central mystery had opened doors to other things she wanted to understand. She found 3 more places where her father's handiwork had inscribed itself in small, specific ways, design choices that weren't strictly functional, but that she recognized as characteristic of how he worked the same habits of craft she had watched her whole childhood, the signature of a particular mind expressed through metal and engineering rather than words. Each one she found felt like finding a photograph she hadn't known existed. It was during this 3rd hour that she found the marking. It was on the inside of the frame at the junction of 2 tubes near the engine mount, a place you would never see unless you were looking for something on the interior surface of the chassis, which nobody ever would be unless they had a reason to go looking there. Small, precise, engraved with a sharp tool rather than painted or stamped. 2 letters, EC. She sat with those 2 letters for a long time. Her initials, her father's initials. The same 2 letters that had been on the door of the shop in Cutter's Bend for 31 years. She understood then more fully than she had from reading the letter what this motorcycle was. It wasn't just a machine, it wasn't just a masterwork, though it was that. It was a message. Her father had built it as a message long before she was old enough to receive it, long before he was sick, long before the shop was in trouble, built it and left it somewhere he trusted would hold it in the keeping of people he believed would keep it safe, waiting for the day his daughter would be ready to hear what he had to say. She pressed 2 fingers against the engraved letters, and she said out loud in the empty room, "I hear you, Dad." Then she stood up and went back to work, because that was what he would have wanted her to do. By the time she emerged from the small room for the 3rd time, the quality of light in the building had changed, and she realized with some surprise that most of the afternoon had passed. The room she came back into was quieter than before. Many of the men had dispersed into other parts of the building or left for the day, but there were still 8 or 9 people present, including Marcus. And they looked at her when she came in with a different quality of attention than they'd given her when she first arrived. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but something that was moving in that direction. Marcus poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot near the window and handed one to Emily without asking if she wanted it. She took it and drank half of it in the first sip because she'd been running on the 2:30 in the morning, 4 hours of sleep foundation for the whole day, and the coffee was exactly what she needed. "Tell me where we are," Marcus said. The bike needs online work before it's fully road ready, Emily said. 12 years of sitting, even carefully maintained, leaves its mark. The seals are aging, there are a few fluid systems I want to drain and refresh, and the transmitter needs a new power source before I can guarantee the cutoff override holds reliably. But mechanically, structurally, the motorcycle is in remarkable condition. Whoever maintained it in storage knew what they were doing. Reno Bay, Marcus said. He's taken care of it since for a long time. He did a good job, Emily said, and she meant it without qualification. Can you complete the repairs? Yes, Emily said. I'll need a couple of specific components I don't have with me, and I'll need another day, maybe two, but yes. Marcus nodded slowly, turning his coffee cup in his hands. The room was quiet around them. Then he said without looking at her, your father was important to this chapter. He wasn't a member, but he was connected to us. He worked alongside some of our people for several years. He was good at what he did. He paused. He was good at more than what he did. What does that mean? Emily asked. Marcus finally looked at her. It means there are things about him you may not know yet. And there are things that happen that aren't entirely my story to tell. Emily set her coffee cup down. Victor Lawson, she said. Marcus was quiet. He's been watching me since I got here, Emily said. Not the way everyone else has been watching me. Different. Like he already knew something before I showed up, or like what I'm doing here is making him feel something he doesn't want to feel. Marcus considered this for a long moment. Victor's had a complicated relationship with your father's name for a long time, Marcus said carefully. It's a history. It's not mine to go into. Does it have something to do with why the bike has been sitting for 12 years? Marcus looked at her, and in the looking in what he chose not to say, Emily Carter got her answer. She was on her feet and walking toward the back doorway before she fully registered the decision to move. Victor Lawson was outside. She'd seen him go out there 20 minutes ago, and she had a question that was going to get asked tonight because there was something in this story that she couldn't fix without knowing it, and fixing this story was as important as fixing the motorcycle because the motorcycle was the story. Victor was standing in the parking area outside the back door alone, looking at the middle distance, the way a person looks when they're in a conversation with their own thoughts. He heard her coming. She wasn't trying to be quiet, and he turned to look at her. He was a full head taller than she was and 39 years older, and the weight of both those things was present in how he stood. You want to ask me something, he said, not a question. My father, Emily said. You knew him. I knew of him, Victor said. There's a difference. What happened between you? Victor looked at her for a long time. The desert evening was moving in around the edges of the day, cooling the air to something bearable after the brutal hours that had preceded it. Somewhere in the distance, a dog was barking. That's not a conversation for tonight, Victor said. With respect, Emily said, I'm not entirely sure I have the luxury of not tonight. I'm here for one more day, maybe two. I'm trying to understand something about my father and this machine and this chapter, and you're part of that understanding, whether you want to be or not. Victor's jaw tightened. You're a lot like him, he said. It didn't come out as a compliment. Then you know I'm not going away, Emily said. A long silence. Victor looked away back toward the middle distance, and when he spoke, his voice had changed from its stone quality to something rougher, like the stone had developed a crack. Your father and I had a disagreement, he said, a serious one, about what happened to someone I loved. I blamed him for it. He stopped. And, Emily said, and I spent 8 years making sure that motorcycle never ran, Victor said. Every mechanic who came through, I didn't touch them. I didn't threaten them. I didn't need to. But I knew about every attempt before it happened, and I made sure certain adjustments were made before each one. Small things. Things that looked like existing damage. Nobody ever knew. Emily stared at him. You sabotaged every attempt, she said. Yes, Victor said. I say for 8 years. Yes. You kept my father's work locked inside a dead machine for 8 years because of a grudge. It was more than a grudge, Victor said, and now the roughness in his voice was something else, something that had been compressed for a very long time and was finding a crack to move through. It was my brother. You don't know what it is to lose a brother. Emily looked at him. She thought about her father dead 8 months the shop with $60,000 of debt behind it, the 2:30 mornings, and the advertisement folded in the technical manual. No, she said quietly. I don't know about a brother, but I know about losing the person who made you who you are, and I know about finding out that person was larger and more complicated than the version of them you lived with your whole life. So maybe just tell me what happened. The real version, not the one you've been carrying. The dog stopped barking. The desert evening settled around them. And Victor Lawson, for the first time in 8 years, started to talk. Victor Lawson did not tell a story the way most people tell stories. He didn't build toward it, didn't warm up to it, didn't soften the edges. He told it the way a man tells something he's been carrying alone for so long that the telling itself has become a kind of violence, abrupt and necessary and painful, in the specific way that honesty is painful when it's been delayed for 8 years. His brother's name was Danny Lawson, younger by 6 years, the kind of younger brother who makes the older one feel like the world might actually be okay because there is this person in it who you love completely and who is brilliant and reckless and alive in a way that fills the room without trying. Danny had come into the chapter at 24, 4 years after Victor, and where Victor was deliberate and careful and strategic, Danny was electric. He made decisions fast and lived inside them fully and rarely looked back. The chapter loved him for it. Victor loved him for it and was terrified of it simultaneously, the way you love the thing in a person that you know is also the thing most likely to hurt them. Daniel Carter had come into their orbit 6 years before the accident, not as a member he never patched in, but as someone connected to the chapter through work and proximity and the particular kind of trust that develops between people who are good at what they do and recognize that quality in each other. Daniel did engine work for the chapter. Extraordinary engine work, the kind that went beyond maintenance into something closer to artistry. And over time, he and Danny Lawson had become friends, real friends. The kind built on long working hours and shared language and the mutual recognition of people who both understand how things work at a deeper level than most. Danny had an idea. He was always having ideas, but this one was bigger than most, an experimental motorcycle project, a custom build that pushed into configurations that hadn't been done before, that required the kind of precision engineering that only someone with Daniel Carter's capabilities could execute. He'd talked Victor into supporting, it talked the chapter into allocating space and resources, and he and Daniel had worked on it together for 8 months in the chapter's garage. Victor paused when he got to this part. He was looking at the ground and his hands were in his jacket pockets, and the desert evening had gone fully dark around them without either of them noticing. The explosion, Victor said. Emily waited. There was a fuel system problem, Victor said. Something in the experimental configuration Danny had designed. A pressure buildup that neither of them had anticipated. Daniel was closer to it than Danny when it let go. Victor stopped, cleared his throat, continued. Danny pushed him, just reached out and shoved him hard out of the way. And then the explosion happened where Daniel had been standing. The silence that followed was the kind that has mass. Danny died, Emily said. Instantly, Victor said. They told me that. Instantly. I held on to that for a long time because it was the only thing that felt like mercy in any of it. Emily was very still. You blamed my father, she said. I blamed your father, Victor said, because he was alive and Danny wasn't, and because the project was his work, and because I needed somewhere to put what I was carrying, and Daniel Carter was there and Danny wasn't. He said it with a flatness that was worse than anger would have been. The flatness of someone who has examined a thing from every angle for 8 years and arrived at a conclusion about it that doesn't make him feel better. I know what that sounds like. What did you do? Emily asked. I didn't hurt him, Victor said immediately. Something firm in his voice, not defensive, but precise. I never touched him, but I made it clear he wasn't welcome. I made it clear to anyone in the chapter who had connections to him that those connections were a problem. Daniel Carter left Red Valley within a month of Danny's death. He never came back. Victor paused. The motorcycle was already finished by then, the one he built. He brought it here 2 weeks before he left and asked Marcus to keep it safe. And you started sabotaging anyone who tried to repair it, Emily said. Not immediately, Victor said. The first few mechanics, I let them try. I watched them fail on their own, and part of me was glad about it. It felt like justice, like the machine was honoring Danny by staying broken. He shook his head slowly. Then the fourth mechanic got close, started asking the right questions. And I made some adjustments the night before he came back, and he failed. And after that, it became a habit, a ritual, something I couldn't stop doing because stopping would have meant admitting what I was doing, and admitting it meant admitting other things I wasn't ready to admit. Emily looked at him. What things? Victor raised his eyes from the ground and looked at her directly for the first time in the conversation. That I was wrong, he said, about your father, about what happened, that I took a grief I didn't know how to hold, and I turned it into something that felt like righteousness, because righteousness is easier to live inside than grief. He stopped talking. The night had settled around them completely. Emily could hear voices from inside the building, muffled and distant. How did you know you were wrong? Emily said. I didn't, Victor said. Not until tonight. Not until you came out of that room with your father's letter, and I saw your face. He was quiet for a moment. Your father never defended himself. After Danny died, he never told anyone what actually happened. He never explained what Danny did. He let me hate him, and he walked away from this place, and he never once said Victor is wrong about this. He just left. Emily understood something then, something that settled into her understanding of her father like a piece that had been missing from a picture she'd been looking at her whole life. Daniel Carter had known what Victor Lawson needed. He'd known that a man who just lost his younger brother needed someone to hold the weight of that loss against, and he'd made a decision quietly without announcement, without martyrdom, to be that something. He'd walked away from a chapter he was connected to, from a place he'd worked, from the people he knew, and he'd never said a word about why, because saying why would have taken something away from Victor at the moment Victor needed it most. He never told me any of this, Emily said. Her voice was quieter now. He wouldn't, Victor said, and there was something in the way he said it that told Emily he understood Daniel Carter better than he'd let himself admit. Victor, Emily took a step toward him. Danny didn't die because of my father's mistake. You understand that now? I'm beginning to, Victor said, and his voice for the first time had something broken in the surface of it, just a hairline fracture, just enough to see through. Danny saved him, Emily said. He made a choice in a fraction of a second to put his own body between your father's best friend and something that was going to kill that friend. That was Danny's choice. That was Danny being exactly who he was, reckless and alive and willing to spend himself completely on the people he loved. Victor turned away from her. His shoulders were doing something subtle and effortful that told her he was holding something in place by will. You can grieve that, Emily said to his back. You can be destroyed by it, but you can't make it into something your father did wrong. Danny made a choice. Honor it. The silence that followed lasted a long time. She didn't feel it. Her father had taught her that too. Some silences need to be allowed to finish themselves. You can't rush them, and you can't help them. You can only stand still until they're done. When Victor turned back around, his face had changed. The stone was still there, would probably always be there. You don't carry something for 8 years and lose the marks of it overnight. But the thing that had been locked behind the stone, the thing that had been driving it and feeding it and using it as cover, was visible now in a way it hadn't been before. I need to talk to Marcus, Victor said. Okay, Emily said. And I need to tell the chapter what I did, about the mechanics. He said it like a man reading a list of things that are going to cost him something significant, saying them out loud so they can't be taken back. Yes, Emily said. That's going to be a hard conversation, Victor said. Probably, Emily said, but you know how to have hard conversations. You've been having one with yourself for 8 years. She left him there and went back inside. Marcus was where she had left him, at the main table with his coffee cup and his reckoning expression. And when Emily came back in through the back door, he looked at her and then looked past her and then looked at her again. Victor's coming in, Emily said. He has something to tell the chapter. You should probably get everyone together. Marcus put down his coffee cup. What did he say to you? He said what needed to be said, Emily told him, and then he decided to do what needs to be done. Let him do it. Marcus looked at her for one long moment with an expression that was somewhere between respect and something more complicated than respect, the look of someone encountering a quality in another person that they didn't expect and that has recalibrated something in how they're seeing things. Then he stood up and raised his voice and said, Everybody in. Now, main room. It took 6 minutes to assemble the chapter. Men came in from the back, from the garage, from other parts of the building, gathering with the particular efficiency of people used to responding to that tone of voice. They ranged in age from mid-20s to Victor's 64, and they brought with them the combined accumulated experience and authority of an organization that had been running in this town for decades. And they arranged themselves in the rough horseshoe formation they used for chapter meetings, and they looked at Marcus. Victor Lawson walked in from the back door a minute after everyone else. He stood at the edge of the horseshoe, not at any position of authority in it, just at the edge, and he looked around at the faces he'd known for years, some of them for decades, and he took a breath. "I have something to tell you," he said, "and I'm going to tell it straight because there's no way to do it that isn't going to be what it is." The room was completely still. He told them. He told them about Danny and Daniel and the night of the accident. He told them about the grief and what he'd done with it and why. He told them about every mechanic he'd sabotaged across 8 years, the specific adjustments, the specific moments, the specific decision to make Daniel Carter's greatest work look permanently broken, because he'd needed it to be broken. He didn't soften any of it, and he didn't explain any of it beyond the bare truth of what had happened and why. He said, "This is what I did, and this is why I did it, and I was wrong, and I understand that now." The room reacted the way rooms react when the foundation of something they trusted shifts. Not with anger immediately, anger came later for most of them, but with the stunned, recalibrating quality of people encountering information that requires them to reorder how they have understood a significant period of time. Cutter said, "8 years, Victor." "Yes," Victor said. "You sat here for 8 years and watched men fail at something you were making them fail at and didn't say a word." "Yes. That's not something I can understand right now," Cutter said. His voice was level, but carrying something underneath the level that was not level at all. "I'm not asking you to understand it right now," Victor said. "I'm asking you to know it. What you do with it is your decision." Reno was standing with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He was the one who'd maintained the motorcycle for years, who'd kept it clean and protected and in as good a condition as could be managed, while believing it was simply an unfixable machine. Learning that it had been deliberately unfixable, that his careful maintenance had been in service of a deception he hadn't known was happening, that was a specific kind of betrayal, and it sat differently on his face than it did on the others. "I maintained that bike," Reno said. Quiet, more contained than Cutter, which somehow made it more. "I know," Victor said. "I cared about that bike," Reno said. "I treated it like it meant something." "It does mean something," Victor said. "That's the whole problem. That's what I couldn't stand." Marcus Walker had not spoken since Victor started talking. He had listened with his full attention and his hands flat on the table and his face in a configuration that said, "I am hearing every word of this, and I will speak when I have heard all of it." When Victor finished, Marcus was quiet for a long time, long enough that the silence acquired a texture. "The mechanics," Marcus said finally. "The 63 men who came through here and went away believing they had failed. Some of them took that personally. Some of them left with their confidence shaken." "I know," Victor said. "We paid some of them," Marcus said, "for their time, because Marcus Walker does not let a man work without pay. We paid them and watched them leave, and none of them knew what actually happened." "I know," Victor said again. "Victor," Marcus said, and then he stopped and started again. "You've been with this chapter for 38 years. You've been one of the people I trust most in the world. This," he stopped again. "I don't have a word for what this is right now. I need time." "Take what you need," Victor said. "I'll be here." It was Emily who spoke next, and she spoke from her position at the edge of the room, not part of the horseshoe, not seated at the table, just standing near the wall where she'd been watching all of it unfold. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "There's something else," she said. Every head in the room turned toward her. "My father's letter," Emily said. She reached into her pocket and took out the folded paper she'd been carrying since she opened the metal box. "There's a part of it I haven't shared yet. I want to share it now because this room deserves to hear it." She unfolded the letter. Her father's handwriting filled the page in the careful, deliberate way he did everything, and she read aloud. He had written it knowing she would find it. He had addressed it not to her by name, but to the person who comes after me, because he said he didn't know what form that would take or when. He wrote about the motorcycle and why he built it the way he did. As a test, he called it, not a test of mechanical skill, but of the quality of attention someone brought to a machine, the ability to listen rather than diagnose, to follow rather than assume. He said only one kind of person passes that test, and he knew who he was building it for, even if he didn't know her timeline. Then he wrote about Danny. He wrote about the night of the accident in the specific, precise language of a man who had replayed it so many times it had worn grooves in his memory. He wrote about the pressure system and the warning sign he should have caught earlier, and hadn't, about the noise that told him in the half second before impact what was about to happen, about turning toward the door. He wrote about Danny's hand hitting his shoulder. He wrote about the sound. He wrote, Danny Lawson saved my life. He knew what he was doing. He chose it in less than a second because that's the kind of man he was. And I have spent every day since then trying to be worth that choice. He wrote, I left Red Valley because Victor needed somewhere to put his grief, and I was the right place. I understood that. I don't regret it. But I want whoever reads this to know the truth because the truth matters, and Danny deserves to have it known. He wrote, I built this motorcycle as a message. The message is that the things we love don't disappear when we can't see them. They wait. They keep themselves ready. And when the right person comes, they run. Emily folded the letter. The room was completely silent. Victor Lawson sat down in a chair near the wall and put his face in his hands. Not crying exactly. Something beyond or before crying, the physical posture of a man whose structure has given way in some fundamental place and who needs a moment to find out what remains. Nobody looked at him. The chapter gave him that without being asked. Some rooms know instinctively when to look away, and this room, for all its hard edges and difficult history, was one of them. Marcus Walker's hands were flat on the table and his eyes were closed. Emily watched him breathe for a moment, slow, deliberate, the breathing of someone managing something large, and then he opened his eyes and looked at her. Your father was a good man, Marcus said. He was complicated, Emily said. But yes. Both things, Marcus agreed. Reno uncrossed his arms. He looked at the floor for a moment, then looked up at Emily. What does the bike need? He said. To finish it. What does it need? Emily recognized what was happening in that question. Reno was doing the thing that some people do in the aftermath of something emotionally overwhelming, returning to the concrete, to the functional, to the thing that can be held in the hands and worked on. She understood it completely because her father had been the same way. New seals on 3 systems, she said. Full fluid refresh, new battery and power source for the transmitter. 2 or 3 specific components I'll need to source. I can give you a list tonight. And time, probably a full day of careful work. I can get the parts tonight, Reno said. I know who to call. Then we start in the morning, Emily said. We, said Cutter, not a question, just the word as standing alone, checking if she meant what it sounded like. If you're willing, Emily said. Cutter looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Cutter. Something passed between them. The particular wordless exchange of people who've spent decades reading each other. And then Marcus nodded once. We're willing, Cutter said. That was the moment the room changed. Emily felt it the way you feel a temperature shift, subtle but definite, something in the quality of the air, or the way people held themselves. The distance that had been maintained since she walked in that morning, the careful watching, evaluating distance of people deciding whether to trust something new, closed by several degrees. Not all the way, not yet, but measurably. Victor lowered his hands from his face. He was looking at Emily across the room with an expression she didn't have a category for because it was made of things that don't usually occupy the same face at the same time. Shame and relief and grief and something else. Something that looked, if she was reading it right, like the beginning of a different relationship to a story he'd been trapped inside for 8 years. What do you need from me? Victor said. The room noticed that he'd asked. Several people looked at him and then at Emily, tracking the question and what it meant that it was being asked. Tomorrow, Emily said, I'm going to need to access a few things in the frame I haven't gotten to yet. Some of them are in positions that are easier with 2 people. One to hold and one to work. She paused. That could be you if you're willing. Victor looked at her for a long moment. You'd let me touch it, he said. My father built it for this chapter, Emily said. He built it to be part of this place. You're part of this place. Yes, I'd let you touch it. Victor nodded once, the way a person nods when they don't trust themselves to say more than that. Marcus stood up from the table. All right, he said in the tone of a man returning an organization to its axis. Reno parts list. Emily, write down everything you need. Cutter. I want the garage prepped and cleared for full access first thing tomorrow. We're going to give this thing the day it deserves. He looked around the room. And I want it understood that what happened in this room tonight stays in this room until I decide otherwise. Victor told us the truth. That counts. We deal with it internally and we deal with it like adults. Clear. The room said yes in the various ways that rooms of that kind say yes. Some verbal, some just a movement of the head, and Marcus closed the meeting. As people dispersed, Emily stood near the back and thought about her father. She thought about him folding that advertisement into the pages of a technical manual, probably years before he got sick, putting it somewhere he trusted she would find it. She thought about how well he'd known her well enough to know she'd be up at 2:30 in the morning when things were at their worst. Well enough to know she'd act on it before the sensible part of her brain could talk her out of it. Well enough to know she'd walk into this place with a toolbox and no fear and come out with the truth. She thought you knew exactly what you were doing, Dad. And then she thought, I'm going to finish it. I promise you I'm going to finish it. Reno appeared at her elbow with a legal pad and a pen. Parts list, he said. Emily took the pad and pen and started writing. She was halfway down the page when Boone came in through the front door faster than she'd seen him move before, his expression carrying something that changed the quality of the room. Immediately, the particular look of a person bringing news that isn't good and needs to reach the right person fast. Marcus, Boone said. Marcus turned. There's a man outside, Boone said. Says his name is Harlan Reeves. Says he has legal business with the chapter. He paused. He's got paperwork. The room went still. Marcus walked toward the front without hurrying, which was somehow more alarming than if he'd moved fast, and Emily stood with the parts list in her hand and felt something cold move through the room that hadn't been there a moment ago. She didn't know the name Harlan Reeves. She'd never heard it. But the way Boone had said legal business and paperwork in the same sentence, and the way everyone in the room had gone very quiet very suddenly, told her that this was the kind of news that arrives at the worst possible time and means to stay. She looked at the parts list in her hand. She looked toward the front of the building where Marcus had gone. She put the pen down on the table and followed him. Harlan Reeves was not what Emily expected. She didn't know what she'd expected exactly, something louder. Maybe something that matched the cold weight his name had dropped into the room. But Harlan Reeves was a thin man in his mid-50s with the careful grooming of someone who understood that appearance is a form of argument and invested accordingly. He was wearing a collared shirt and khaki trousers that looked wrong. In this context, the way wrong things always announce themselves. And he was holding a manila folder with the practiced ease of a person who carries paperwork, the way other people carry weapons, knowing exactly what it can do and comfortable with that knowledge. He was standing just inside the front entrance with two other men behind him, neither of whom were introduced and neither of whom needed to be. Their function was obvious. Marcus Walker stood facing him with his arms at his sides and his expression giving away nothing. Emily came to stand near the wall where she could see both men clearly. Mr. Walker, Harlan Reeves said. His voice was smooth in the way that some voices are smooth, not naturally, but deliberately sanded down over years of use into something that didn't catch on anything. I appreciate you seeing me this evening. You didn't give me the option of not seeing you, Marcus said. Boone said you have paperwork. I do. Reeves held out the folder. Marcus didn't take it immediately, which Reeves absorbed without visible reaction, then set it on the table nearest him. I represent an interest in a piece of property currently being held on these premises. A custom motorcycle, unregistered, built approximately 14 years ago by a mechanic named Daniel Carter, who at the time of its construction was operating under a service agreement with a company I have since acquired the assets of. Under the terms of that agreement, any property constructed using company resources, time or materials, became company property. The motorcycle falls under that classification. The room was completely still. Emily looked at the folder on the table. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Harlan Reeves. That's a significant claim, Marcus said. His voice was level and gave nothing away. It is, Reeves agreed pleasantly. It's also a documented one. The paperwork in that folder includes the original service agreement, the asset provision clause, and the chain of acquisition showing my company's current ownership of the original entity. I'm not here to cause problems, Mr. Walker. I'm here because I've recently become aware that the motorcycle is in the process of being repaired, which makes it worth something it hasn't been worth for the past 12 years. And I'm here to formally establish my interest before that repair is completed. You waited until it was almost fixed, said Cutter from near the back wall. His voice had a specific quality to it. Reeves glanced at Cutter with the practiced neutrality of someone accustomed to rooms that don't like him. I became aware of this situation recently, he said. I acted promptly. How recently? Emily said. Reeves looked at her. Something moved in his expression, a brief recalibration, the look of someone who has just registered an element of the situation they didn't fully account for. And you are Emily Carter, Emily said. Daniel Carter's daughter. The recalibration in Reeves's expression completed itself into something more careful. I see, he said. How recently did you become aware? Emily said again. Within the past 48 hours, Reeves said. 48 hours. Emily had driven to Red Valley 36 hours ago, which meant Harlan Reeves had known someone was coming to work on the motorcycle before she'd walked through the door or had learned about it within hours of her arrival. She held that information and didn't say anything about it yet. I'd like to see the paperwork, she said. Reeves looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Emily. Something passed between them that wasn't quite a question and wasn't quite a permission, more like Marcus acknowledging that Emily had standing here that he was going to respect. He picked up the folder and handed it to her. She opened it and read. The service agreement was real. That much was immediately apparent. It had the look and language of an actual legal document rather than something fabricated quickly, which meant Reeves had been holding this for a while and had been waiting for the right moment to use it. Daniel Carter had signed it 16 years ago, and the asset provision clause was present, and it was broadly worded in the way that asset provision clauses in service agreements often are, broadly enough that a sympathetic reading could support Reeves's claim. But she kept reading. The chain of acquisition was 3 documents, long original company intermediate sale Reeves's current entity. Each step was documented. Each step looked clean at first pass. I need more time with this, Emily said. Take what you need, Reeves said graciously. The graciousness of someone confident in his position. I'm not here to rush anyone. I'm simply here to establish that my claim exists and is documented. You have 72 hours to respond formally. That's in the letter at the back of the folder, after which I'll be compelled to pursue the matter through other channels. Other channels meaning legal action, Marcus said. I prefer not to go that route, Reeves said. This can be resolved simply. The outstanding amount under the original agreement's asset valuation clause, taking into account the motorcycle's current state of near completion, is $47,000. Your chapter pays that amount within 72 hours the claim is discharged and the motorcycle is yours free and clear. Alternatively, I take possession of the motorcycle upon completion of repairs. He smiled the smile of a man offering a choice between 2 options he controls. Those are the terms. $47,000 in 72 hours. Emily watched the room absorb that number and felt it land the way it was designed to land, heavy enough to be demoralizing, but not so extreme as to be obviously extortionate. Calibrated. This was a calibrated number from a man who calibrated things. We'll be in touch within 24 hours, Marcus said. Reeves nodded. He picked up his folder, or rather the copy of the folder he'd brought, leaving the original on the table, and he and his 2 background men walked out of the clubhouse the same way they'd come in. The door closed behind them. The room exhaled. Then it got loud. Not chaotic loud. These weren't people who lost their shape under pressure. They'd been operating under pressure of various kinds for decades. But loud in the way of people processing something fast and seriously cross conversations, starting simultaneously, the collective intelligence of the group turning itself toward the problem. Marcus raised a hand and the conversation stopped. Emily, he said, talk to me about the paperwork. She had the folder open on the table in front of her, and she was working through it page by page with the same methodical attention she gave to an unfamiliar engine, following what was actually there rather than what she expected. The service agreement is real, she said without looking up. My father signed it. The clause is real. The question is whether the clause applies the way Reeves says it does. Does it? Reno asked. The language is broad, Emily said. Property constructed using company resources, time, or materials. The question is whether the motorcycle qualifies. My father built it when, if he built it on his own time with his own materials, the clause doesn't apply regardless of the agreement. The agreement only covers work done in service of the company. How do you establish that? Marcus asked. Records, Emily said. If my father kept build records, receipts for materials, time logs, anything that shows the motorcycle was built independently of whatever company he had that agreement with, that breaks the chain. She finally looked up. Does anyone know what company this agreement was with? It's listed here, but I don't recognize the name. I do, said Victor Lawson. The room turned toward him. He'd been standing near the back since the confrontation with Reeves, not participating, watching with the particular stillness of a man deciding what his role in this new situation was. At the sound of his own voice, he straightened slightly. It was a parts distributor, Victor said. Out of Flagstaff. They went under about 9 years ago. Daniel had a consulting arrangement with them. He used their supply account when he was sourcing materials, and he gave them a discount on any work he did for them in exchange. He paused. But the motorcycle, he built that on his own time with materials he sourced and paid for himself. I know because Danny was there for part of the build and told me about it. Daniel was meticulous about keeping it separate from the consulting work. He said he didn't want any outside claim on it. Emily stared at him. You know that for certain. Danny told me, Victor said. I didn't understand why he was telling me at the time. Now I think your father told Danny specifically so that Danny would tell me so there would be someone who knew. He shook his head slowly. Even that. He planned even that. That's the counter-argument, Emily said. She turned back to Marcus. If my father kept records showing the motorcycle was independently built, purchased receipts for materials, time records, anything, establishing the build was separate from his company work, the service agreement's asset clause doesn't apply, and Reeves's claim fails. The problem is those records would be in my father's files, and my father's vehicles are 30 miles north in a repair shop that has 48 hours left before the bank takes it. The statement landed in the room and nobody spoke for a full 3 seconds. Then we go get them, Cutter said. Simple, declarative, the way Cutter said most things. Emily looked at him. You don't know that the records exist, or that they're still intact, or that I can find them in time. Do you think they exist? Cutter said. Emily thought about her father. She thought about the advertisement folded in the technical manual. She thought about the transmitter in the metal box and the letter on folded paper and the initials engraved on the inside of the frame. She thought about a man who planned everything with the kind of patience and precision that most people can't sustain for a week, let alone across years and decades. Yes, she said, I think they exist. Then we go get them, Cutter said again in exactly the same tone as if the first statement and the second were the same statement, because they were. Marcus looked at Emily. You need to go back to that shop. I need to go back to that shop, Emily confirmed. Tonight. The sooner the better. If those records exist and I can find them, we have an answer to Reeves before he expects one. If I wait, I'm giving him time to prepare for whatever we find. Marcus nodded once. Boone, you'll go with her. I don't need, Emily started. You're driving 30 miles in the dark to a building a bank is about to repossess to search through your dead father's files for documents that might save a motorcycle from a man who already knows you're doing this, Marcus said. You don't need company, but you're getting it anyway. Emily closed her mouth. Okay, she said. Reno, Marcus continued, turning. The parts you were going to source tonight still do it. I want everything ready for first light. We are going to complete that motorcycle tomorrow, regardless of what Reeves thinks he has. His voice had picked up a quality that silenced any question about whether this was a plan or a directive. Victor looked up. You said you know the build was independent. Do you have anything in writing? Anything Danny told you that was written down anywhere? Victor thought for a moment. The whole room waited on that moment. Danny kept a journal, he said slowly. He did it for years. I have them. I haven't opened them since he died. He stopped, started again. But if he wrote down what Daniel told him about the build, it would be in there. Go home, Marcus said quietly. Find the journals. Look. Victor looked at Marcus. 8 years of complicated history between them was present in the 3 seconds of eye contact that followed. Then Victor nodded once and walked toward the door. Emily was already picking up her jacket. The drive north was 30 miles of empty desert highway under a sky full of stars that didn't care about any of it, which Emily found oddly steadying. Boone drove, he'd insisted, and she decided not to spend energy arguing about it in a truck that smelled like engine oil, and old coffee, and someone's idea of pine air freshener. He didn't talk much, which she appreciated. She needed the quiet to think. She was thinking about the records. Her father's filing system had been one of the things she'd teased him about her whole life, elaborate, color-coded, internally logical in a way that required knowing how his mind worked to navigate. To a stranger, it would have been impenetrable. To Emily, who had grown up watching him build and maintain it, it was a system she could move through quickly if the documents were there to be found. The problem was what had happened to the shop in the 8 months since his death. She'd been in there, of course, many times trying to keep the business running, sorting through what needed sorting through. But she hadn't gone through the archives. The active files, the recent work orders, the supplier invoices, those she'd handled. But her father had kept older records in a separate filing system in the back room organized by project and year, and she hadn't touched that room since the funeral. If the build records for the motorcycle existed, they were in that room. She was almost certain of it. Her father had been too organized, too deliberate, too aware of exactly what he was doing when he built that machine to have left the documentation to chance. The shop materialized in the headlights at 11:40 at night, and Emily was out of the truck before it fully stopped moving. The shop smell hit her the moment she unlocked the front door. The layered, complex, deeply familiar smell of her childhood motor oil and rubber and metal filings, and the faint sweet note of WD-40, all compressed into a space that had held 31 years of her father's working life. She stood in it for 1 second, and then she moved because standing in it was something she could do later, and right now she had a clock running. The back room was where she expected it to be. The filing system was intact. Her father had organized it the way he organized everything, with a precision that looked excessive, until you needed something and found it in 30 seconds because of exactly that precision. She went to the section labeled Independent Projects and found it immediately. A hanging file folder, brown manila, labeled in her father's handwriting, Custom Build AMC Personal. Personal, not company, not client. Personal. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that. Inside the folder was everything. Receipts for every component, purchased, dated, and itemized, every one of them paid from her father's personal account rather than any business account. A build log in his handwriting, dated entries, spanning 8 months of construction, times logged with the precision of a man who wanted anyone reading it to understand this had been done on his own hours. A separate type note, dated and signed, explicitly stating that the construction project was undertaken independently of any existing service or consulting agreements, and that no company resources, materials, or time had been used in its completion. He'd had it notarized. Emily sat down on the floor of the back room of her father's shop at midnight with a notarized statement in her hands, and she started to laugh. Not the performative kind, the real kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere deep, when a person encounters something that is exactly as thorough and meticulous and premeditated. As the person who made it, the laugh of recognition, the laugh of course you did. Of course you covered every single angle. Of course you knew. Boone appeared in the doorway. He looked at her on the floor with the documents in her hands. You found them, he said. He notarized it, Emily said, still somewhere in the laugh. He had the independent build declaration notarized 14 years ago. Boone stared at her. Then something that might in the right light have been described as a smile moved across his face. Smart man, he said. The smartest, Emily said. She photographed every document with her phone before she touched them, then carefully removed the full folder from the filing system. She found a box in the supply shelf, packed the documents securely, and carried them to the truck. On the drive back, she called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring. I have them, she said. Build log material receipts from his personal accounts and a notarized declaration of independent construction. 14 years old, signed and stamped. The silence on Marcus's end lasted exactly long enough to mean something. Then he said, he notarized it. He notarized it, Emily confirmed. Another pause. Your father was something else, Marcus said. Yeah, Emily said. He really was. She was back at the clubhouse by 1:15 in the morning. Marcus and Reno were still up. Reno had the parts he'd made calls and driven to Tucson and back in the time Emily had been gone, and the components she'd specified were laid out on a work table in the garage with the particular care of someone who takes the job seriously. Emily looked at the parts and felt the specific satisfaction of a plan that was actually going to work. She spread the documents on the main table and walked Marcus through each one. He listened and looked and asked 2 specific questions and then sat back. This breaks Reeves's claim, he said. Completely, Emily said. The service agreement's asset clause only covers property built using company resources. My father has 14-year-old documentation proving this motorcycle was built entirely independently. Reeves can file whatever he wants. He won't win. He's going to try anyway, Marcus said, not pessimistically, just accurately. Let him try, Emily said. But we should have a lawyer look at this in the morning before we respond to him, so we're going in with a formal opinion rather than just our own reading. I know someone, Marcus said. She'll be available in the morning. Chapters used her before. He looked at Emily for a moment. You should sleep. We start work on the motorcycle at dawn. I'll sleep here if that's all right, Emily said. I don't want to drive back tonight, and I don't want to be 30 miles away when this starts. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he stood up and went to a supply cabinet near the back hall and came back with a folded blanket and a pillow. He put them on the couch against the far wall without comment, which was in its own way as significant a statement as anything he'd said all day. Emily looked at the couch, looked at Marcus. Thank you, she said. Get some sleep, he said. You've got a motorcycle to finish. She did sleep. Deeply and without interruption, the sleep of someone who has been running on adrenaline and grief and determination for 36 hours and has finally found a moment safe enough to let the body do what it needs. She woke to the sound of the garage coming to life around her compressors, voices the metal-on-metal sound of tools being organized, and she was on her feet and moving before she was entirely awake. Reno was already in the small room with the motorcycle when she got there. He'd pulled in a second work light and laid out the tools and parts on a clean tarp with the systematic organization of someone who knew what was coming and had prepared accordingly. He looked up when Emily appeared in the doorway and said without preamble, "Where do we start?" "Seals first," Emily said, "then fluid systems, then the transmitter circuit." "Show me," Reno said. And that was how it began. What happened in that garage over the next 9 hours was something none of the men who witnessed it would describe the same way twice, but all of them would describe as something they were glad to have been present for. It started with Emily and Reno and grew organically without direction or announcement as other members of the chapter drifted in and stayed. Not to watch to work. Whoever had a useful skill found a way to apply it. Whoever could hand a tool did. The small room that had been locked and isolated for 12 years became the center of the building's activity, and the motorcycle that had been a source of failure and legend and grief became a collaborative project in the most literal sense. Victor arrived at 7 in the morning with Danny's journals under his arm. He stood in the doorway of the small room where Emily was working and waited until she looked up. "I found it," he said. He held out the journal, a battered composition notebook with a cracked spine open to a page near the middle. Danny wrote about the build, about 3 pages of it. He describes the materials, where Daniel sourced them, what account he used. He says explicitly that Daniel insisted on keeping it separate from any business arrangements because, he said, Victor paused and looked at the page. He said, "The thing I'm building doesn't belong to any agreement. It belongs to someone specific, and I need it to be clean." Emily took the journal carefully and read the passage. Danny Lawson's handwriting was nothing like his brother's, loose and fast and enthusiastic, the handwriting of someone whose thoughts move faster than his pen. But the content was clear and the dates were consistent with what the other documentation showed. "This corroborates everything," Emily said. I know, Victor said. She handed the journal back to him. "Can we use it with the lawyer?" "Yes," Victor said. "Whatever you need." He didn't leave after that. He stayed. And when Reno needed a second pair of hands on the frame, exactly as Emily had predicted the night before, it was Victor who stepped in and held what needed holding while Emily worked. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. There was a different quality to the silence between them now than there had been the day before. The silence of people who have said the necessary things and can now exist in the space that those things opened up. The lawyer, a compact woman named Sheila Torres, who had sharp eyes and a direct manner, and clearly didn't need to be explained to, arrived at 9, reviewed the documents in 40 minutes, and delivered her opinion at 9:45. The service agreement's asset clause did not apply. The independent build documentation was thorough enough to be definitive. Harlan Reeves had a piece of paper that looked like a claim, and no actual legal foundation to support it in the face of what Daniel Carter had prepared. Marcus called Reeves at 10. Emily was in the garage and couldn't hear the call, but she heard about it from Cutter, who had been standing in the doorway of Marcus's office when it happened, and reported it back to the garage with the particular satisfaction of a man delivering good news. "Marcus laid it out," Cutter said. "Read him the documentation list. Told him the chapter's attorney had reviewed everything, and the claim was without merit. Told him if he pursues it legally, we pursue a counteraction for harassment and bad faith legal action." He paused for effect. Reeves hung up. The garage made a noise. The kind of noise that's not quite a cheer but has all the same ingredients. That's it? Reno asked. Men like Reeves don't fight when the ground goes out from under them, Cutter said. They find easier ground somewhere else. Emily went back to work. By 2 in the afternoon, the seals were done. By 4, the fluid systems were refreshed and the new transmitter circuit was installed and tested, and the battery was charged and confirmed at full capacity. By 5:30, Emily had gone over every system one final time with the thoroughness her father had instilled in her, not checking her work exactly, but honoring it, making sure every piece of it was what it needed to be. She stood up and rolled her sleeves down and looked at the motorcycle. Reno was standing beside her. Victor was at the door. Through the hallway, she could hear the rest of the chapter word had spread through the day as the work progressed and people had been coming and going. And now, at this hour, more of them were present than at any point since she'd arrived. She could hear them out, their voices low, the particular quiet of people waiting for something. Is it ready, Rito? Well, I don't know, Reno asked. Emily looked at the motorcycle. She thought about her father's hands on these components before hers. She thought about the 8 months since his death and the $60,000 of debt, and the advertisement at 2:30 in the morning, and the 30-mile drive, and the 70 pairs of eyes that had watched her walk in with nothing but a toolbox. She thought about the initials on the inside of the frame. Iska, yes, she said. It's ready. Then let's take it out where everyone can see, Reno said. They rolled it out of the small room for the first time in 12 years. Down the hallway, into the main garage. The men who were there moved back to make space, not because they were told to, but because the moment had the quality of something that deserved room, that required a certain amount of air around it. 70 people. That's how many had gathered by the time the motorcycle came to rest in the center of the garage floor. Word had spread beyond the building at some point during the day. Families, associates, people connected to the chapter in various ways, and they had come because some stories travel ahead of themselves and people arrived to witness the ending without fully knowing why they felt they needed to be there. Emily stood beside the motorcycle. Marcus Walker stood across from her with the chapter arranged around them in the shape of a community rather than an organization, and he looked at her with an expression that was very quiet and very certain, and he said, "Go ahead." Emily reached into her pocket and closed her hand around the transmitter. She took one breath, just one. She started the engine. The sound that came out of that machine was not just sound, it was 12 years of silence ending. It was a message received after being in transit for over a decade. It was a man who had loved his daughter enough to build her something she could only find when she was ready for it finally being heard. The engine ran through 11 seconds without a tremor. Past 12, past 20, past a minute. It ran with the full, grounded, purposeful voice of something built by someone who understood that a machine at its best is not just a collection of parts performing a function, it is a form of intention made real, a decision about what matters enacted in metal and engineering and time. Nobody cheered, not at first. The sound of the engine was enough. The room held it the way you hold something you've been waiting for without knowing exactly how long. And the quality of the silence around the engines running was the quality of people being exactly where they are, not elsewhere, not before or after, just there. Then Victor Lawson, who was standing at the far edge of the room with Danny's journal in his hands, said something that wasn't loud enough for most people to hear. But Emily heard it. She was close enough. He said, "There it is, Danny." And then the room erupted. The engine ran and the room roared, and for about 45 seconds, the Red Valley Hells Angels chapter lost its collective composure entirely, which was something that essentially never happened, and which every person present would remember for the rest of their lives. Then the cheering broke into something more specific. Individual voices, individual reactions, the communal noise fracturing into the particular sounds of people processing something personal inside a shared event. Cutter was gripping Reno's shoulder and saying something Emily couldn't hear. Two of the younger members were looking at each other with the slightly stunned expression of people who'd heard the legend, their whole chapter life, and were now standing inside its resolution. Boone, who had spent 30 hours watching Emily work with the skeptical attention of a man who trusted slowly and withdrew that trust only with difficulty, was standing near the garage door with his arms crossed and an expression on his face that was not quite a smile, but was as close as his face apparently got. Emily kept her hand on the transmitter and let the engine run and thought about her father. She thought about him the way you think about someone When the thing they made is alive in the room with you and you understand for the first time the full scope of what they built, not just the mechanical object, not just the beautiful, extraordinary machine that was running in front of her, but the entire architecture of intention that surrounded it. The advertisement in the manual, the notarized declaration, the transmitter in the metal box, the letter, the initials on the inside of the frame, the way he had told Danny Lawson specifically about the independent bill, knowing Danny would tell Victor, knowing that 14 years later, that account would be the corroborating testimony that defeated a legal claim he couldn't have predicted with any specificity, but had somehow prepared for anyway. Her father had not been hiding from her. He had been preparing for her. And there was a difference between those two things so large that standing on one side of it and then crossing to the other felt like moving between two entirely different versions of a life you thought you had already understood. Marcus Walker came to stand beside her. He looked at the motorcycle running, and then he looked at Emily, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only she could hear it under the noise of the room. He talked about you, Marcus said, when he was here. He didn't talk about his personal life much. That wasn't his way, but he talked about you. He said he had a daughter who was going to be better at this than him someday. Emily kept her eyes on the motorcycle. He said it more than once, Marcus said. He said she doesn't know it yet, but she will. The weight of that settled into Emily's chest, and she let it settle, didn't try to manage it or contain it or convert it into something more functional. Just let it be what it was. I didn't know any of this, she said. This whole part of his life, this place, these people, what he built here. He never said a word. He was protecting things, Marcus said. That was how he operated. He kept things separate so that the people he cared about couldn't be reached through each other. Protecting me from what? Marcus was quiet for a moment. From the parts of this world that aren't as clean as a garage, he said. From men like Harlan Reeves. From the kind of attention that attaches itself to people connected to chapters like ours. He paused. From me, if I'm being straight out with you. He didn't know what I was going to be. When he left, things were complicated. He made choices to keep you outside of that. Emily turned to look at Marcus directly. And now you're here, Marcus said simply, and you fixed what nobody else could fix. And your father left you a letter that he trusted this chapter to hold for 20 years if it needed to. He met her eyes. That's not nothing. That's not something you can walk away from and pretend it didn't happen. Emily looked at him. I'm not trying to walk away from it. Marcus nodded once. Something in his posture changed slightly, a small deliberate opening of something that had been held closed. Good, he said. She let the engine run for another 3 minutes. Then she shut it down cleanly, the way her father had taught her respectfully, the way you set down something valuable, not just cutting it off, but letting it come to rest with intention. The garage went quiet in the wake of it, the particular quiet that follows something loud and significant, heavier than ordinary silence. And into that quiet from the hallway door came Sheila Torres. The chapter's lawyer had stayed on site through the afternoon handling the documentation and the call with Reeves's office that had come in an hour after Marcus's call. She had the compact, directed energy of someone who had handled difficult situations before and found them clarifying rather than overwhelming. She was carrying her phone, and her expression had the quality Emily had already learned to read, as there is new information and you need to hear it. Marcus, she said. He turned. Reeves, she said. His office just sent a follow-up communication. He's withdrawing the claim formally. I have it in writing, but he's adding a condition. She looked at the phone. He says the withdrawal is contingent on the motorcycle not being ridden publicly within Maricopa County for a period of 12 months. The room processed this in the 2 seconds of silence before Cutter said, he can't do that. He can't enforce it, Sheila said. It's not a legal condition, it's a negotiating position. He's trying to get something out of this situation on the way out the door because he knows his primary claim failed, and he's not walking away empty-handed if he can help it. She looked at Marcus. My recommendation is to acknowledge receipt and decline the condition. His claim is withdrawn in writing. The condition is unenforceable, and accepting it would imply we believe his original claim had merit, which it didn't. That's your recommendation, Marcus said. That's my recommendation, Sheila confirmed. Do it, Marcus said. Sheila typed for 30 seconds and sent the response and put her phone back in her jacket. Done, she said. Harlan Reeves is out of this. The room exhaled, again. There had been a lot of exhaling in this building over the past 2 days, Emily thought. A lot of things that had been held turning into things that could be released. But before the exhale fully resolved, Boone said, he knew. Everyone looked at him. Boone was still near the garage door, but he'd straightened and his expression had moved from its near smile to something more deliberate. Reeves knew the bike was being worked on before Emily walked in here, he said. She was here 36 hours before he showed up. He said he'd known for 48. That means someone told him before she even arrived. The room got very still. Someone in Red Valley, Cutter said. Or someone watching the building, Reno said. Or someone who saw the advertisement, Emily said quietly. The advertisement my father placed. If Reeves knew Daniel Carter knew about the service agreement and was watching for any activity related to the motorcycle, he could have had a flag on the advertisement. Anyone who responded to it might have triggered an alert. He's been waiting, Marcus said. The flatness of his voice carried something specific, not anger, but the kind of cold-focused clarity that is in some ways more serious than anger. He put that service agreement in a drawer years ago, and he's been waiting for someone to fix the bike so he could show up and claim it. Which means he believed the bike could be fixed, Emily said. He didn't think it was really broken. He thought someone would figure it out eventually. And he wanted to be positioned to take it when they did, Sheila said. It's a patient play, ugly but patient. Is there anything else he can do? Reno asked. Not with this, Sheila said. The withdrawal is clean, but I'd keep an eye on him generally. Men like Reeves cycle back. We know how to handle men like Reeves, Cutter said in a tone that closed that particular thread of discussion thoroughly. Emily was looking at the motorcycle. The conversation around her was important, and she was tracking it, but underneath the tracking was something else, a question that had been forming since Marcus's words earlier and was now fully formed and asking to be addressed. She waited until the immediate reaction to the Reeves news had settled, and then she said, Marcus, I want to ask you something. Ask, Marcus said. The $20,000, Emily said. The reward. You advertised it, which means you intended to pay it to whoever fixed the bike. We did, Marcus said. I fixed the bike, Emily said. You did, Marcus said. I need that money, Emily said. I need it for the shop, to cover what my father left behind, to keep what he built in Cutter's Bend from disappearing. She said it straight, without apology and without performance, because that was how the situation deserved to be addressed. But that's not the only thing I want to ask you. Marcus looked at her. The room was listening. My father's shop has been running barely for 8 months on fumes and my own stubbornness, Emily said. It's a good shop. It has 31 years of reputation behind it. It's in trouble because my father got sick and got proud about it in the wrong order and didn't ask for help when he should have. She paused. I'm a good mechanic. I think you know that now. I'm not asking to patch in. I'm not asking for anything I haven't earned. I'm asking whether there's a version of this where the chapter in Red Valley and the shop in Cutter's Bend have an arrangement that benefits both of us. Legitimate work, referred work, the kind of thing that lets a business stay alive while it finds its footing. The silence that followed was not the silence of people being surprised. It was the silence of people considering something they'd been moving toward without quite saying so. Reno spoke first. We've been driving to Tucson for specialty engine work for 4 years, he said, since our last guy retired. I know specialty engine work, Emily said. I know you do, Reno said. Marcus looked around the room. Not for permission, Marcus Walker didn't need permission from his own chapter, but read for temperature for the particular information that comes from looking at the faces of people you've led for years and understanding what they're telling you without them speaking. What they were telling him was clear. The $20,000 is yours, Marcus said. That was always the deal and it stands. He paused. The other conversation, that's a conversation we have properly, with terms written down and Sheila's eyes on it so it's clean on both sides. I wouldn't want it any other way, Emily said. Marcus almost smiled. No, he said. I didn't think you would. Sheila Torres, who had not left, looked between Marcus and Emily with the expression of a person whose professional services were clearly going to be needed again shortly, and who was fine with that. I'll draw up a preliminary framework, she said. You two can review it tomorrow. Today's not over yet, Emily said. She said it because there was something left. Something that hadn't happened yet that needed to happen, and everyone in the room could feel it without being told what it was. The way you can feel the specific shape of an incomplete thing and know instinctively what would complete it. She looked at Marcus. The motorcycle should be ridden, she said. That's what it was built for. My father built it to run, not to sit. 12 years is long enough. The room moved. A collective subtle shift weight redistributed postures, changing the physical expression of a group of people orienting towards something. Who rides it? Reno said, and his voice carried genuine uncertainty because the question was real. This wasn't an ordinary machine with an obvious rider. This was Daniel Carter's work, Emily Carter's discovery, Victor Lawson's 12-year wound, the chapter's legend and burden, and now, improbably, its resolution. Who rides something like that? Emily should ride it, Victor said. He said it from the back of the room simply and without hesitation, and it landed with the weight of something that once said was obviously right. The man who had spent 8 years preventing this motorcycle from running had just said without qualification that Daniel Carter's daughter should be the first to ride it. The room acknowledged this in silence because silence was the appropriate response. Emily looked at Victor. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't come here planning to ride anything. She'd come here to fix something, to earn enough money to save her father's shop to do a job. The rest of it had arrived around her in ways she hadn't anticipated and couldn't have predicted. But she'd also learned something across these 2 days about the difference between the things you plan and the things that are true. Her father had understood that difference very clearly. He'd built something beautiful and left it in the care of people he trusted, and written a letter to someone he loved, and folded an advertisement into a technical manual, and waited for the truth to arrive in its own time. Okay, Emily said. She walked to the motorcycle. It was a different experience putting her leg over it than it had been standing beside it with tools in her hands. In the doing the work phase, she'd been in the technical relationship with it, reading it, understanding it, following its logic. This was something else. She was sitting on something her father had built, every curve and angle of which had been decided by his hands, and the fit of it was different from any motorcycle she'd ever been on. It fit the way things fit when they were made specifically, deliberately, with intention. Not for a category of rider, for a person, for her. She felt that understanding move through her, and she didn't try to manage it. She just let it be what it was and kept her hands steady on the grips. She started the engine. The transmitter was in her jacket pocket, and the signal was clean, and the engine came alive under her with none of the hesitation, none of the truncation of the past 12 years, just the full voice of the thing running the way it was built to run, complete. She looked up. 70 people were looking back at her, not with the skeptical, waiting, show me attention of the day before, with something that had no defensiveness in it, something open. The faces of people who have watched something they believed was impossible happen in front of them and have reorganized their understanding of what's possible accordingly. Marcus Walker stepped forward and pulled the garage door open. The Arizona evening came through it warm and dry and carrying the particular smell of the desert at that hour, a smell that was somehow both ancient and clean. The road beyond the fence was empty in both directions. Emily rolled the motorcycle forward through the open door. She stopped at the edge of the lot and looked out at the road. She thought about Cutter's Bend, 30 miles north. She thought about the shop with its corrugated metal walls and its 31-year smell and its $60,000 of debt that was about to become manageable. She thought about the filing system in the back room with its color-coded logic that only made sense if you knew how her father's mind worked. And she thought about what it meant that she knew exactly how his mind worked, had known her entire life without ever fully understanding the scope of what that mind had built. She thought about a man who told his daughter every day in every practical way that he could that she was capable and thorough and patient and willing to listen to what a machine was trying to say, and who left her the most elaborate proof of that belief she could imagine in the keeping of 70 men who needed to see it as much as she needed to find it. Behind her, she heard them coming out of the garage, not all at once, one at a time, then two, then more, the sound of boots on concrete, and then on gravel engines, starting up the particular music of motorcycles that have been in the same organization long enough that you can almost tell them apart by sound. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She felt them line up behind her, felt it in the way sound changes when it's organized, when there's a formation rather than a scatter of noise. 70 people. The same 70 who had watched her walk in with a toolbox and nothing else, who had heard the engine die 11 seconds at a time for 12 years, who had carried the legend of the cursed bike the way you carry something you've stopped expecting to put down. They were putting it down now. She heard Marcus's voice from somewhere in the formation behind her. Not loud, he didn't need to be loud. When she moves, he said, we move. Emily Carter took one breath of desert air. She thought, I hear you, Dad. I have always heard you. She opened the throttle. The motorcycle moved onto the road with the confidence of something built to be exactly where it was. She didn't go fast at first, not because she was cautious, but because some moments deserve to begin at the speed that lets you feel them fully. The engine under her was everything it had sounded like in the garage, everything the previous 2 days had been building toward, not just functional, not just operational, but alive in the specific way that things are alive when they've been made with love rather than only with skill. Behind her, the chapter moved. She heard it, the collective sound of 70 motorcycles pulling onto the road behind her, organizing themselves into something that was not quite formation and not quite procession, but had qualities of both the sound of an organization expressing itself through motion, the way it had always expressed itself best. She increased speed gradually. The desert opened up on both sides, miles of space in every direction, the particular freedom of the high desert in the early evening, the sky moving toward the colors it gets when the sun starts to consider the horizon. She had ridden motorcycles before her father had taught her, of course, because her father had taught her everything, but she had never ridden this. Never ridden something made for her by someone who loved her. Never ridden at the head of something this large. Never ridden with the specific combination of grief and gratitude and forward motion that she was riding with now. The road stretched out ahead, and the engine spoke its grounded, purposeful language beneath her, and the chapter moved behind her like something waking from a 12-year sleep into motion, and Emily Carter rode. They went for 40 minutes. No destination, no route, just the road and the desert and the evening light, which was doing things it only does in Arizona at that hour, painting the landscape in colors that shouldn't be possible in R anyway. She didn't think about the shop or the debt or Harlan Reeves or the documentation or anything that required calculation. She thought about her father, and the thinking was different from how it had been for the 8 months since his death. Not less sad, but the sadness had a different shape. It had context now. It had the shape of a thing that was complete rather than cut short. When she finally turned back toward Red Valley and the clubhouse lights came into view, she let the speed drop gradually and felt the chapter match her. The whole formation moving together with the ease of people who have been moving together for decades and know how to read each other through speed and distance and the quality of attention that comes through in how a rider sits on a bike. She pulled back into the lot and stopped and cut the engine. The silence that followed the formation coming to rest was absolute. 40 minutes of road sound, 40 minutes of engine and wind, and the particular acoustic experience of 70 motorcycles moving together and then nothing. Just the desert and the cooling engines ticking quietly and 70 people arriving back at a place that was the same building it had been this morning and was absolutely not the same place. Marcus pulled up beside her. He cut his engine and sat for a moment the way people sit when they want to stay inside something a little longer before it becomes the past. How does she ride? He said. Like he knew exactly what he was doing, Emily said. He always did, Marcus said. She swung her leg off the motorcycle and stood beside it. Reno materialized on her other side, and the two of them stood looking at it together, the machine that had been a legend and a curse and a locked message, and now finally a running, ridden, complete thing. Reno put his hand on the tank briefly, the way you touch something you've cared for from a distance for years and are now allowed to touch properly. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Victor was the last one off his bike. He came to stand in front of the motorcycle, and he looked at it for a long time. Emily let him look. The journal was in the saddlebag of his bike. He tucked it there before the ride carefully, as if putting it somewhere it could travel with them. I want to say something, Victor said. He wasn't addressing Emily specifically. He was addressing the chapter, the people moving around them in the settling aftermath of the ride. And he spoke in a voice that was quiet enough that people had to be close to hear it, which meant the people closest in moved closer, and the noise around them dropped. I spent 8 years doing the wrong thing for a reason that felt like the right one, Victor said. I was wrong about Daniel Carter. I was wrong about what happened to Danny. And I was wrong to let that wrongness run for as long as I let it run. He paused. I can't give those years back. Can't give them back to the mechanics who came through here. Can't give them back to this chapter or to Emily. He looked at her directly. What I can do is make sure what I do from here goes in the other direction. The chapter received this without comment, which was its own form of response. These were not people who rushed to reassure. They accepted what was offered at face value and let it stand on its own. That was, Emily thought, its own form of respect. "Oh, thank you," she said to Victor, simply, without qualification. He nodded. Marcus came to stand near the motorcycle. He had the chapter's full attention without doing anything to get it. That was the quality of his particular authority, that it didn't require performance. He looked at Emily. "I'm going to say something to you in front of these people," he said, "because I want it witnessed." The lot went quiet. "Your father was one of the best people I ever knew," Marcus said. "I didn't tell him that enough when I had the chance. I'm telling his daughter now because it's true, and because she deserves to know it, and because the thing she did in the last 2 days is the single most impressive piece of mechanical work I have seen anyone do in 30 years of watching people work on machines." He paused. "But that's not the only thing that was impressive." Emily waited. "You came in here with nothing," Marcus said. "No reputation here, no connections here, no reason we should have given you the time of day. And in 36 hours, you fixed a machine that broke 63 professionals, uncovered a truth that's been buried for 8 years, defeated a legal claim with documentation your father prepared a decade and a half ago because he knew this day would come, and rode his motorcycle out of this lot at the head of this chapter." He looked around at the people gathered. "That is not a small thing. That is the kind of thing that gets remembered." He turned back to Emily. "The 20,000 is yours," he said. "And the conversation about the shop, we have that conversation tomorrow with Sheila in the room, and we do it properly. But tonight I want you to know." And here his voice changed just slightly, lost one layer of the formal quality, and found something more personal underneath. "Tonight I want you to know that this chapter considers Daniel Carter's debt to us paid in full, and it considers itself in debt to his daughter." The chapter said yes to this in the way chapters say yes to things, not in unison, not choreographed, just an aggregate of individual assent that was cleaner than any unified response because it was real. Cutter said, "She fixed the bike. She stays if she wants to stay." Reno said, "I'd work beside her again." Boone near the back said nothing, but he gave Emily a single nod of the particular kind that means more than most speeches. Emily looked at the motorcycle. She looked at the people around her, men she hadn't known existed 48 hours ago, who had watched her with suspicion and doubt, and then with something else, something that had been building slowly from the moment she said, "I came in here to listen to it," and had arrived after 2 days in a ride through the Arizona evening at the place where it was standing. She thought about her father choosing this place, choosing these people, choosing to leave his greatest work in their keeping and trust, that it would be there when it needed to be there. She thought about a man who understood that trust is not blind faith. It's an assessment made carefully over time based on the evidence of who people actually are. She thought he'd been right. "I'll be back Thursday," she said, "for the conversation with Sheila." She looked at Marcus. "And I want to do a full system review on the motorcycle before I go. There are 2 things I want to check that I didn't get to this afternoon." "The garage is yours whenever you need it," Marcus said. She stayed another hour, not working the review, could wait until Thursday. She'd been running for 2 straight days, and her body was starting to present its invoice. She stayed because the evening had a quality she didn't want to leave prematurely, the quality of something that has resolved into peace after a long time being something else, and she wanted to be in it a little longer. She sat with Reno at the main table, and they talked about engines, specific problems, the particular technical language of people who think mechanically as their native mode. She found that talking with Reno was easy, in the way that talking is easy when you share a fundamental orientation toward the world and don't need to explain your premises before making your points. He asked her twice to clarify something and then caught up fast and didn't need to ask again. She respected that. Victor sat across the room for most of the hour, not in any conversations, just present. At one point, he took out Danny's journal and read from it for a while, and the expression on his face while he read was not one Emily was going to describe to anyone because it belonged to him and not to her. But she saw it and she filed it, and she was glad he had it. At 9:30, she picked up her father's toolbox. It had been sitting near the garage door since morning, moved carefully out of the way when the work started, but kept present, which was a small thing, but which she noticed. Marcus walked her to her truck. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she confirmed. Drive careful, he said, and his voice had the flat, practical sincerity of a man for whom drive careful is not a pleasantry, but an actual directive. Always, Emily said. She put the toolbox in the passenger seat of her truck, and she sat for a moment before starting the engine, looking at the clubhouse. The lights were on inside, and she could see shapes moving behind the windows and hear faintly the sound of people in a building that had something different in it now than it had 24 hours ago. Not quieter, not louder, just different. Just the specific difference of a place that has put something down after carrying it for a long time and is learning what it feels like to move without that weight. She thought about her father. She thought about him not as the man she'd thought she knew, the small-town mechanic who smelled like oil and called her Bug and made bad coffee and never talked about this town or these people or the machine he'd left in their keeping. She thought about him as the whole person, the complicated, thorough, patient, meticulous, loving person who had understood things about legacy and trust and the nature of machines that most people spend their whole lives not quite arriving at. The person who had known somehow that his daughter would come to a place she'd never heard of and fix a thing everyone else had given up on and find inside it everything he'd ever wanted to say to her and hadn't known how to say with words. He'd been right that she'd find it. He'd been right that she'd know what to do when she did. He'd been right about the kind of person she was because he'd been paying attention for 25 years in the careful, detailed, loving way that he paid attention to everything that mattered to him. She started her truck. The road north was empty and dark and familiar 30 miles of desert between the place her father had left something for her and the place where he had built her who she was. And Emily Carter drove it with her father's toolbox in the passenger seat and the transmitter in her jacket pocket and $20,000 of relief waiting in a transaction that would happen in the morning and an arrangement taking shape that would keep her father's shop alive and give it the footing it needed to become what she was going to make it. She drove and she thought about a motorcycle running in a garage after 12 years of silence and 70 people cheering for something that went beyond a fixed machine and a man named Victor Lawson saying, "There it is, Danny," to a brother he'd been grieving wrong and could now grieve right, and a letter in her father's handwriting that had been waiting in a metal box for her to be ready to read it. She drove and she understood in the thorough and settled way that some understandings arrived, not sudden, not dramatic, but complete, that her father had never left her. He had been present in everything he taught her, every instinct he'd built in her, every habit of attention and patience and willingness to listen that had carried her through the last 2 days. He had been present in the motorcycle, and the letter, and the transmitter, and the notarized declaration, and the initials on the inside of the frame. He had been present in the way she set the toolbox down on a concrete floor in front of 70 skeptical people and said, "I came in here to listen to it," because that was his sentence before it was hers. His understanding, his way of being in the world passed to her in the only way the best things are ever passed from one person to another, not by instruction but by example, accumulated daily across the whole length of a childhood, and a life lived alongside someone who showed you, by everything they did, what it looked like to pay real attention to the things that mattered. The shop came into view at 10 past 10, dark and quiet and still, the corrugated walls catching the truck's headlights for a moment before she turned in and cut the engine. She sat in the silence and looked at the building her father had worked in for 31 years. She was going to save it. She knew that now, with the certainty that she'd known the engine was following instructions, rather than failing, the certainty that comes not from hope, but from understanding. She understood what the shop was and what she was and what the path forward looked like. And it wasn't easy and it wasn't fast, but it was real, and real was enough. Real was everything. She got out of the truck and took her father's toolbox from the passenger seat and carried it inside. She set it on the workbench where it had always lived, where she had handed tools out of it before she could read their names, where her father had set it down at the end of every working day for 31 years, with the particular care of someone who understood that the tools were an extension of the work, and the work deserved to be honored. She stood in her father's shop with her father's toolbox in front of her, and the transmitter in her jacket pocket, and the knowledge of what she'd done, and what was coming, and what her father had always known she was capable of, and she said one more thing to the empty room. She said, "I've got it from here, Dad." And the room held that the way good rooms hold the things set inside them, not letting them go, not losing them to the air, but keeping them the way all the years of work and care and attention that had happened in this space had been kept layered into the walls and the workbenches, and the smell that would always be before anything else, the smell of her father's life. The cursed bike was a legend no longer. The woman who walked into a room full of doubt with nothing but a toolbox and a willingness to listen had walked out with the truth, the money, the respect, and something no one could have written into any advertisement or reward, the full knowledge of who her father was, in proof, iron solid, engine, deep, 70 people witness proof that he had known exactly who she was too long before she knew it herself. Some stories end with a bang. Some end with a ride into the desert and 70 engines behind you and the right kind of silence when it's over. This one ended with a woman putting her father's toolbox back where it belonged in the shop he'd built, and she was going to keep standing in the particular dark that comes before the next thing begins. Not the dark of loss, not the dark of endings, but the ready dark, the purposeful dark, the dark that exists specifically to be followed by a morning where the work continues. And the people who taught you how to do it live on in the way your hands know what to do before your mind tells them. That is what Daniel Carter built. Not just a motorcycle, not just a message, a mechanic who would carry him forward in the only way that actually lasts, in the quality of her attention, the patience of her hands, and the absolute refusal to walk away from a machine or a truth or a life worth saving until she understood what it was trying to say.